Now, this event is particularly very important for our community. Anybody know what's the history of the Fair Housing Act? Raise a hand. Do you know it? Okay. Fair Housing Act. What year was it voted in? 1968. In my mind, I've always wondered, it was passed in 7 short days because of a major landmark incident. Anybody know what that was? Assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King. Dr. Martin Luther King was assassinated on April the 4th, 1968. 7 short days. Can you imagine Congress getting something through in 7 days? Congress. Now, I've always wondered, there was a lot of bickering. I mean, fair housing was just not a topic, when he got assassinated, but it had been something that they were discussing for generations and generations. I've always wondered, the assassination of Dr. King. Lyndon Johnson signed it April 11th. Was there an agreement of the people to sign it because it was the right thing to do? Or was it passing the law because, 1968 was a lot of chaos going on in our country. What was it? What really was in the hearts and minds of our leaders to get that passed through? But see, there was a lot of inner city that was burning up. I mean, let's say burning down. So, was it the right thing to do? Or was it a combination of both? But nevertheless, it was passed. We're going to have a special guest speaker, Regina Jones. It was passed in 1968, but it wasn't enforced until 20 years later. 20 years later, the fair housing was enforced. My name is Walter Huff. I am the Rocky Mountain NAACP Housing Chairman President, whatever that matters. That doesn't really matter. I'm here because you, me, our children, our grandchildren are standing on the shoulders of giants who suffered, who died, who lost properties, who wasn't able to go to the school for equitable education. And so we're here to commemorate 55 years of the Fair Housing Act being passed in law by Lyndon Johnson. Now, I'm also a realtor, through NARAB, National Association of Real Estate Brokers. Anybody have any knowledge about who they are, what they do, what they stand for? Regina, who are we? Okay. On point. Who else? Who else knows anything about NARAB? NARAB, we're celebrating our 76th year in existence. July 29th, 1947, 12 pioneering black shero and heroes gathered together in Tampa, Florida. 1947. As far as north as Detroit, from Texas, they gathered from 7 different states, standing in the gap to allow us to be where we're at right now. Could you imagine traveling from Detroit to Tampa in 1947? There wasn't no freeways, sophisticated freeways and byways. There was a lot of back roads. There was a lot of black roads. But I am convinced when they gathered 76 years ago, they were aided by another innovation source called the Green Book. Anybody heard of the Green Book? The Negro, I call it the first edition of AAA. The Green Book was produced 11 years before 1947 by an African-American Harlem postal worker, Dr. Victor Green, Mr. Victor Green, and his wife, Alma Green. The Green Book. 7 different states, Rashad. Could you imagine going from Detroit down to Tampa? And if you know the history, there was a term that's called sundown towns. Anybody heard of that? You did not want to get caught up in a sundown town. So I'm convinced while they were traveling down to Tampa, you know they had the Holy Word, God's Word right there, and they just happened to put that Green Book there. So I say that to say this. We've come a long way as a black community, but we've got such a long, long way to go. 1968, Dr. Martin Luther King spoke at our midwinter conference in San Francisco in April. No, it was in February. And he talked about petition Congress to approve a urban Marshall Plan. Anybody familiar with the Marshall Plan? The Marshall Plan was created by the Congress secretaries named after George C. Marshall. Mr. Marshall was the Secretary of the United States, where they created a stimulus package in 1947 to aid the 16, 17 European countries that World War II had bombed. Do you hear what I'm saying? A stimulus package that really those countries, to rebuild those countries, to make those countries great like they are today. And then when we start talking about reparations, Germany, Spain, Britain, their descendants are still getting reparations, still benefiting from the Marshall Plan. And Dr. King said we need a Marshall Plan for the inner city in February 1968. And part of this Marshall Plan was, how do we create benefits for the World War II veterans that's coming back home? Part of this Marshall Plan was to create VA benefits for World War II veterans. See, when they came back home, Dr. W. Du Bois said we returned home from fighting and returned home fighting more. There was a study that was done in 1947 of a county in Mississippi. They examined the approval, the guarantee of the federal government of VA loans. VA loan is a loan that you can get where the government will guarantee the loan, not approve the loan. There, in this study, there was over 13,000 loan applicants of World War II veterans that was studied to see what loans were guaranteed for. Out of those 13,000, how many do you think that was approved of VA veterans? Let's take a guess. How many? Out of 13,000. Huh? 1,300? That's being very generous. We're talking about 1947. We're talking about segregationists, racists, sitting on the board of credit unions and banks. There was only two. Two black veterans loans were guaranteed out of these 13,000 World War II veterans in 1947. You might comment, well, that's Jim Crow, that's in the South. Well, let's go up north to New Jersey, New York. You see the same trends. The decision makers to guarantee the World War II veterans are the same people who didn't want the passing of the Fair Housing Act. And you look at it, the VA bill, the VA benefits, historically was given credit for creating the middle class. It created the middle class. They were able to get funding for their businesses, funding for education. So you look at it, 76 years ago, if I'm a World War II veteran, I get my loan guarantee, my children see I'm a homeowner, they buy a home, their grandchildren, they buy a home, and we're talking about this home ownership gap. It's intentional. It was created by Congress. Redlining, where banks, credit unions, FHA literally took black communities and drew a line and said, we will not loan in those areas. Literally. Then the federal government was building highways through our communities. Anybody familiar with the Austin, Texas Planning Act in 1928, where they brought that main highway through Austin, Texas, and said, if you want social services, you have to move on this side of the highway. Austin, Texas Planning, 1928. So you say, how did we get here? There's a lot of gibberish of how we got here. Or you just need to pull up by your bootstraps. Well, what does that mean? What does that mean? What is this pulling up from the bootstraps when you've had a head start? Affirmative action. Write this book down. It's a book that's called Affirmative Action When It Was White. Affirmative action actually was created in the 30s for white Americans. It's right there. So we are here standing on the shoulders of giants. We've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. And so today's program, we're going to have some great conversations. We got 2 documentary clips that we're going to share with you. One is called 7 Days. The other one is called America, Lowballed. We got another issue here. We got an issue when you live in people of color communities, the appraisals are not coming back at fair market value. You have to take down your photos and put, you know where I'm going with this, touchdown Jesus there in there. This is real. This is real. So thank you for coming today. Any questions so far? What do you want to learn from today? Any questions so far? Brother Rock, the next generation, I believe, is going to hold us accountable. They're going to ask us, what did we do about all this? What stand did we take? What stories are we, what fierce conversations are we having with them? See, Dr. King and Malcolm X was starting to collaborate. The nonviolence wasn't working. But I say that to say this. Thank you for our partners. I want to say thank you to the Rising Star Baptist Church family, Pastor Reggie Taylor. Thank him for his vision to allow us to come in here and share this information. Brother Vern, thank you for your partnership. Elegant Catering, Joyce Robinson. Deacon Ernest Reese, thank you. You didn't have to. But see, this is how the black church, the movement started within the black church. If we're going to if we want to make a difference and be change agents, it's going to start with the church. That's my opinion, okay? It's going to have to be the church. So, we've got a lineup here. I'm going to introduce Addison.
Thank you, Walter. My name is Addison. I am working with Walter on the NAACP Housing Committee, and it's really been a privilege to follow his lead on this project. My interest in housing stems back from my youth. I was a homeless teenager for many years. I later worked in homelessness services, so that's a type of work that's very close to my heart. I'm also a graduate student in urban planning at CU Denver downtown. And I'm a geospatial consultant, which means that I make maps. And my big mapping project right now is called Mapping Prejudice, where we are documenting the history of racially restrictive deeds and covenants in Denver. So those are some things that I really look forward to talking to you about as the day goes on. And from here, I think we're ready to turn it right over to Regina. Is that correct, Walter? And Regina, would you like me to press forward on your slides when you instruct, or what's the best way to do that for you? Okay, awesome.
Good morning. Welcome. My name is Regina Jones. I'm with Denver Metro Fair Housing Center. I am the Senior Fair Housing Specialist and Enforcement Coordinator. My job is to enforce discrimination when it comes to housing, whether it's rental, sales, insurance. I'm trying to remember. But let's go to the first slide. No, it's not policy. Basically, what you do is there's a handout on your seats, and it talks about if you feel like you've been discriminated in any of those areas. My name and number is on the back of the page. You give me a call. Make sure you provide me with all of your evidence so that this way I can investigate. And then once the investigation happens, I forward it on to either HUD or Colorado Civil Rights Division or to another attorney who will file suit. So Denver Metro Fair Housing Center is a private nonprofit organization. Our center was established October 2012 and with support of the National Fair Housing Alliance Center, which is in Washington, D.C., and we're funded by HUD. Next slide. We service Adams County, Arapahoe County, Boulder, Broomfield, Denver, Douglas, and Jefferson counties. Other counties outside of those areas are normally referred to Colorado Legal Services or directly to HUD. Next slide. So our vision, in short, we promote housing choice and residents integration through the Fair Housing Act, which includes all areas of housing in rental, purchasing, insurance, sales, transactions. Next slide. Walter went over and explained when the Fair Housing Act actually really began. It began in 1968, and as he stated, 7 days after he was assassinated. Can you imagine now if something was to happen would anything happen within 7 days. Well, they did that in honor of Martin Luther King because President Johnson, felt like his death would never be in vain, and he wanted to do something as a memorial to his services in regards to his fight for civil rights. In 1974 is when actually fair housing actually really started up, and that's when it was starting to be enforced. They added gender and as the federal protected class. These are your federal protected class. So under the federal government, we have race, color, religion, national origin, sex and gender, which is also includes transgender, LGBTQ communities, in disability and familiar status. Familiar status is basically families with children. It's kind of hard to believe that they would deny families with children into a home these days. For the Colorado state, it's sexual orientation, marital status, creed, ancestry, and source of income. Source of income includes voucher programs, Section 8, anyone who holds a voucher that pays the majority of their rent. Do anyone know what ancestry is? Ancestry is basically if you were Hispanic and you came from Mexico and they look at you, although you were born and raised here in Colorado or in the United States, they look at you and they assume you're automatically from Mexico. So they're using that as your ancestry. Anyone know what the difference between color and race? So your color, when you're walking into, say you're applying for an apartment, and they look at you, they're looking at they're looking at the color of your skin. Your race is if you're African American, if you're white, if you're Latino or Hispanic. That's the difference. So a lot of people who are in the market of renting, they'll look at you and just assume you may not be African American, but they look at you because it's the color of your skin. The next one. So regarding the public policy advocacy agreement, we promote tools to prevent and to respond to discrimination. We're there for you. I can say 24 hours because that's basically the way I feel I've been working, because I'm constantly working with trying to make sure I have everything that I need before filing a case with HUD or with Colorado Civil Rights Division. But we are there Monday through Friday from 9 to 3. Next one. Enforcement. With enforcement, what we do is I collect all the evidence, provide the evidence to HUD or Colorado Civil Rights Division. Then they do their investigation based on my investigation. And then what we do is what they call conciliation. So we try to not negotiate, but we try to work it out between the respondent and the person who's made the complaint. If we can't come to an agreement, the next step is it goes to the Department of Justice, or it's filed in federal or state court. Everything has to happen within the first year. to get it filed into the courts. It'll take maybe 2 years, if not longer, before we'll reach an agreement. Research. I do a lot of research, and with my researches, that includes with testing. I find I get someone who is someone who's white or Hispanic, but I always have a person of color who will be doing the test for me. I create a profile for them, and it has to match the person who is filing the complaint. Once there, I've set that up, and I send them out to do the testing, and then they bring back the information. Then I have to look to see if there is actually really some discrimination there. A lot of times there is. Because of the pandemic, it was kind of hard to get the right data because of everybody was closed up until last year, around about midsummer. So we couldn't collect the correct data, but the complaints that are there, they're still going to be under investigation. Next slide. So, looking at the trends, I have the trends copies on your seats. You can take a look at those. But with the trends, it is 31,216 housing discrimination complaints that have been filed with the national office. Harassment complaints is 35% up from last year. And then the spike in complaints were protected by the federal law, which is 38% for source of income. Sexual orientation is 43%. Marital status is 63%. Then we have your rental market. Out of the complaints that have come in, and this is nationwide, 25,501 complaints were filed with our agencies throughout the United States. Real estate sales, 1,408 complaints have been filed. Mortgage lending, 395 complaints were filed. Harassment, 886 complaints. Now I'm gonna stop right there with harassment. Do you realize that being harassed is not only by your HOA, by your property manager, by someone who is employed with them, but it could be your neighbors as well. A lot of people don't realize when your neighbors are harassing you and you're able to record it, you have witnesses, you have called the police, that's a cause, and the property manager or the HOA has not looked into it or has refused to, you can file a complaint, not only against your neighbor, but you can also file a complaint against the property manager or the HOA. Discrimination by HOAs, 150 complaints, and discriminatory advertising, 271. Now, when you're saying discriminatory advertising, a lot of times you find that on Craigslist or on Facebook, where they're advertising, and they'll say, because they don't assume that nobody's looking, but they're saying no children allowed, no pets allowed, no black people or no African Americans allowed. If you don't speak English, you are not allowed. Those are the type things that you have to kind of watch for, especially if you see it. If you see something like that, first thing you want to do is screen print it. That's your first evidence, because once it's screen printed, it has your date of when you've seen it, and you file a complaint. Okay, combating redlining. So the Department of Justice, which is DOJ, established a new combating redlining initiative in October 2021. The initiative built on Department of Justice long-standing efforts to make mortgage, credit, and home ownership accessible to all Americans. I'm sorry, I was doing this mostly by memory. So we're going to go into redlining. We're going to talk about discrimination in real estate owned properties and maintenance. We have a couple of cases that I'd like to bring to your attention, and not sure if I put that in your packet or not, but one of the first ones is, next page, is the Fannie Mae. We just last year in January 2021 received a $85 million lawsuit. We won a lawsuit from Fannie Mae in regards to discrimination. Each center that was involved in that they got $1.5 million each. $750,000 of that is supposed to be returned back to the community. They're still waiting to see which areas, which people are applying to get the funding, but that'll be towards your down payment assistance once it's been released as to who will be receiving those funding. The next one is Alliance versus Redfin. Redfin did a lot of redlining where they, as they keep moving the zoning line, and they look as to see who was where the most African Americans are, they would move that red line and try to convince people, especially if they're white, they don't want to move into that area. So they won. The plaintiffs that filed the suit against Redfin won $4 million in the settlement. Next one. So how can you help? Make sure you're telling people, if they're talking to you, your friends, your neighbors, family, that if they feel like they've been discriminated against, and I tell people, if it doesn't feel right, 9 times out of 10, you're right, you're being discriminated against. So give us a call. My number is on the form. I'm mostly there. I return calls within 24 hours. The other way you can help is sign up, become a tester, be involved in the community. I'm going to be doing some testing on lending. That's a little bit more detailed. But in regards to lending, we need, you'll have to be able to give up a lot of your personal information, which you will be paid for to do this. But those are some of the ways that you can help. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina. Any questions about fair housing? I mean, yes, ma'am.
So when you're talking about the discrimination with pets and kids, you can't exclude that in a private residence if you're doing rental?
So with pets, a lot of people have pets nowadays. But if your pet is an emotional support animal or they're a service animal, they cannot discriminate against you for that.
So for evidence for source of income discrimination, national origin, how do you, because we in our community of East Colfax, we deal with a lot of this from a lot of different landlords. So we're trying to work with community members who are refugees and immigrants oftentimes in ways to collect evidence to bring cases to you all, to DOJ, and we found it really, really difficult. And so what are some of your recommendations or ways that we can truly prove some of these circumstances? They've gotten a little bit better about like recording when the landlord's screaming at them, things like that. But what are your recommendations for evidence collection?
So I don't know if you guys are aware, in Colorado, state of Colorado, you can record any conversation without anyone's permission, one-on-one. That'll be your first evidence. Number two, because of their yelling, unless they're saying something discriminatory, calling them some horrible names, other than that, it's not enough. You have to make sure, if you're not sure about what they're saying, keep asking questions. In regards to evidence, have witnesses. If you don't have a witness standing next to you, have a witness standing around the corner, taking pictures, help recording. When you're recording, you want to make sure that your recording is not going from one person to another person to another person, because they call that being tampered with. So you want to make sure if they're going to record it, they upload it on their computer, and if they're going to transfer it to someone, they'll transfer it only to the people that they have filed the complaint with.
Any other questions? If not, we're going to move on into the program. We're running a little bit behind, but we'll get caught up. Our next, I want to introduce Rashad Younger. Rashad is going to be speaking on behalf of our president, NAACP Rocky Mountain Conference President, Portia Prescott, who's not able to be here today.
Good morning, everyone. So my name is Rashad Younger. I'm the press secretary for Rocky Mountain NAACP, as well as the membership chair. But first and foremost, giving honor to Father Yahweh God. Thank him for today, which is his Sabbath day rest. I thank everyone that is here that is actually doing the work. Want to give honor to the shepherd of this house. I think the first thing I wanted to talk about when we're talking about civil rights and the Title 8 Civil Rights, which is the Fair Housing Act, is actually asking you guys a question. When did civil rights actually start for us as a people? So no hands, no one's willing to. So I would actually say it started way before that, right? It actually started when our ancestors were snatched from their homes in Africa, right? If you think about it, we've been fighting for civil rights since the first slave entered that ship and was brought to this land. But we can't even just say that. There's also, in regards to historical records, and I always tell people to do research and find out about your history, right? Because they're not going to tell the truth about our history. If we look at California right now, they're talking about reparations in regards to black people. And a lot of people are saying, well, California didn't have any slaves. How do we know? Why was the first black woman that was on their emblem on that emblem? So there was black people here, right? And if we try to say that there wasn't, then we're basically saying we're not intelligent enough to actually travel the seas and to colonize just like, the other party, right? Like white people. So when we're talking about civil rights, we've been fighting this fight for a very long time. And like I said, giving honor to God, it actually started with Adam and Eve. When they got kicked out of the garden because of the deception of the devil, that's where it started in regards to our fight. Because if we look at civil rights and the history of it, it's the protection and it's the fight for our inalienable rights, the right to have a house over our head and be protected and not have to worry about the KKK coming in, snatching up our ancestors and hanging them and lynching them. So we've been fighting this fight for a long time. And if we talk about the civil rights movement, right, and this act being passed in 1968, a lot of us took our foot off the gas in regards to fighting. We still have to fight, you know. The reason why I'm still here fighting is because I have a little one. And like Mr. Huff said earlier, she's gonna ask me, Daddy, what did you do? What was your actions? What steps did you take to be able to make sure that I have a good future? So I'm showing her. This is not her first meeting. She's been around the NAACP since she was a baby. So she has seen her dad constantly fight. And I'm thankful to individuals like Mr. Huff, myself, and others that are involved with the NAACP, because a lot of people think, like, we get paid for this. I don't get paid for this. I don't get paid to come and speak and talk about the fight that we have to get going or keep pressing forward. But I know it's necessary. It's not just necessary for my daughter, it's also necessary for all the other kids in regards to legacy, because we are a village and we're a community and we have to fight. And I'm appreciative allies, you know, other people that aren't black, you know. And when I talk about black, like, it's okay to talk about black. Because if you look at other communities, they talk about their communities. The difference in regards to our community is we always fight for everyone else. And we put ourselves last. We always say, you know, well, we got to look out for other people, and we don't want to be, you know, discriminate against them or sound like we're being selfish. Like, we are unselfish people. And the reason why is because we're the soul people. You know, just like we say in regards to soul food, the reason why we say soul food is because we encompass the morality of the Most High Yahweh Father God. I mean, look at this country. Even with building it, we built this country brick by brick, blood, sweat, and tears, to be able to make sure that this capitalistic system was able to support people that didn't even consider us, right? And so now we're in a situation where it's like, even the civil rights movement, this legislation that is in place for us to be able to continue to fight, it was on our backs. Our ancestors passed for that. Were killed, assassinated, just to be able to make sure that we have some of the opportunities that we have now. But like I said before, it doesn't stop. We don't want Dr. King's name to be in vain. It didn't just say just because he was killed, now we get a chance to, just because we have a good paying government job, then we made it. And we still have black people that are homeless in the city of Denver, that don't have a roof over their head, that don't have protection. And so when we talk about fair, everyone deserves fair housing. No one deserves to be discriminated against. But I challenge all of us to keep that fight going, especially us as black people. We never stop, we never quit. Either we serve the world or we serve God. And this is God's work, to be able to make sure that we can continue to move forward and that all people have protection, because that is our God-given right, and housing is a part of that, right? And so how do we do that? I talked about the history. One of the things in regards to that is reparations. And I'm not going to quit saying it. I've been saying it. I don't know if anyone's ever heard me speak before, but I'm going to keep saying reparations. And this is the reason why I say reparations. I work in insurance, right? And so what I have to teach my clients, so financial planning and insurance is what I do. And I teach my clients and I tell them, I said, hey, you know, in regards to your homeowner's insurance, your auto insurance, your umbrella insurance is going to provide you liability protection. So if you get in a car accident, you hit someone, and if that person is injured, or if they die, guess what? You're responsible for that person's damages. And so I make sure that they have the right coverage so that way if something like that happens, it's not falling on their balance sheet. And so just for some of you to kind of teach, if you don't know what a balance sheet is, it's assets minus liabilities equals your net worth, right? But in regards to assets and liabilities, you still have to have protection, because disaster doesn't just, say, hey, tomorrow I'm going to show up at 3 o'clock and totally disrupt your world. And so if people don't have the right protection, then it depletes their assets. It can increase their liability. It can actually also affect their income, right? I can expect $1 coming into my household to address this situation over here, but now this disaster is in place, and now I have to take that dollar and try to fix this situation because I didn't prepare. And that's the reason why insurance is in place. So going back to the reparations questions, in regards to someone that is wronging you or has wronged you, if you take that before the court, they don't say, hey, you know what? We're only going to give you the money if you do this. We're only going to give you money for education because you don't really know what to do with it, even though this person hit you. No, the judge says, no, you wronged this person. You have to give them the dollars. You can't put stipulations on that individual in regards to what they're going to do with the money. So in regards to reparations talk, what I always try to tell people, quit, even as black people, we got to quit telling people this is what we need to do with that money. We need to do it for education, or it needs to go here. Who cares? We're divided, and they're using that division against us because they're saying, well, black people ain't smart enough. They need to put it towards education. We need to put that money towards education so that way the economic gap can close. But I tell people, I said, at the end of the day, black people are smart. I'm not saying everyone is going to do smart with their money, but at the end of the day, if it's damages, and we've been wrong from slavery to Tulsa, Oklahoma, to redlining, like we've been talking about, to discrimination even today, dealing with the black farmers up in El Paso County. We've been wronged over and over again. So when someone wrongs us and they're guilty of it, they have to pay. And there shouldn't be any stipulation on what we do with that money. Because if we actually had the money already, we would already have generational wealth. If you look at it, back during the times, even the early 1900s, there was a lot of black wealth. But we've been robbed of it. Even in Park Hill, where I live, East Denver, where I live, there are more individuals that don't look like you and I that have moved into that neighborhood. And the main reason why is because people acquire the property, right? Young youth, and sometimes they don't have the education in regards to being able to manage the property. And you have someone that is kind of like colonializing them. So I'm saying the word wrong. I apologize. I'm chopping it up. But basically, they're coming in and saying, hey, sell me that property. I see the debt that you have. So instead of, and I'll wrap it up, instead of you being in a situation where you have to deal with that stress, I'll give you $250,000 for your property when the house is worth $400,000, $500,000. So we're being robbed of our wealth because we never even had the financial means to be able to pay the taxes, to deal with other things. So what I'm saying is, we as a people got to continue to fight. We got to hold Biden. He's the president in office right now. I don't care who was in before. He's the president right now. He needs to be held accountable. Our elected officials need to be held accountable. We need reparations. So that way we can have housing for our family. We can use housing in regards to wealth building. But the only way that happens is we have to continue to fight and move forward in a positive direction, not only for everyone else, but solely also for us as black people. So I appreciate the opportunity to be able to speak on behalf of Rocky Mountain NAACP chapter. But the main objective in regards to this conversation from my end is keep fighting, keep pressing forward, don't give up. And I appreciate the people that are in the room. Corey Thomas, I appreciate you being in real estate to be able to make sure that black families have homes. So thank you for the work that you guys are doing, and thank you for at least letting me borrow a little bit of your time. Thank you.
All righty, thank you, Rashad. Well, we're off and running. Now we are running a little behind. We've got a clip, 7 days. Just as a refresher, how powerful that 7 days from the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King to the passing 7 days later. I've never seen Congress move so fast in 7 days. And so we're going to have this little clip, and then we're going to move in and start opening up where you can start grabbing a bite to eat. All right, let's go. Oh, okay, we're not yet. Any questions so far from the audience? What kind of feedback? I guess my question is, yes, Herman. Y'all looking at me, I'm looking at y'all. What are some of the current solutions that we have in place? We have some really heavy, real activists, community activists in this building right now. Miss Ann, I just got to say, Miss Ann, would you please? Anybody who has not met Miss Ann is a true activist. She's the president and CEO of Montbello 2020. She's been my mentor. She has helped me stay the course in this fight. And Miss Ann, would you just have a few words? Out of respect.
Okay, thank you. Glad to be here for this event. It's very important to me and to my community and my family and to all of us to, as they say, continue to fight. I live in Montbello, and there are a lot of problems that are going there. I have Montbello 2020, which is a registered neighborhood organization, and we work with other organizations to continue to keep our community and our city up to date and clean and acceptable, and where the equity, equality, and transparency can come across. We are hosting our annual event once a year in August, bring all the community together. It's called a Health, Wellness, and Back to School event. Rashad has been at one of my events. I was glad to see you be here, that you're here today. And what we do with that event is we offer health care, screening, everything is free. We work with Be Well and other foundations around to bring those amenities to our community because there's so many. We don't have health equity in Montbello. We have a health center that we cannot even access because it's overwhelmed and it's too small, and we've been fighting to get a health center out there for all ethnicities in Montbello. That is not the case now. So just to say, continuing to fight and everything, and I'm so happy to be here. And Walter, he's been a long-term friend, and I see some others here. I see Shantae here, and Rock is here. And so I'm just happy to be here, and I just want to say, we as people, as black folks, we need to continue to fight. I continue to fight for my family, my children, and future generations, and our children.
Thank you, Ms. White. Thank you. The question is, where are the solutions? My good friend, Tyrone Adams, when we're talking about solutions, that means it's okay to agree to disagree, Herman. That means that we can't get caught up about personal feelings. We have to keep the vision straight, write it down, and make it clear. There are solutions, Herman. One, we need to hire more loan officers that looks like us. We need to hire more appraisers who look like us. We need to have education on the ground. I'm very adamant. We are our community's first teachers. Why wouldn't a church not have a housing ministry? Why? Brother Tyrone, why wouldn't a church have a housing ministry? Do you know if a church is a nonprofit, they can apply to become a HUD certified housing counselor? Why wouldn't the church not have a housing? That's a solution, Herman. Let the church file a 501c3 and start a HUD certified housing counseling. I know how to do it. That's a solution. Financial wellness, for our children. That's a solution. And there's so many others. Shantae.
Hi, I just want to say one of the other things that we can do is start with our younger generation by helping them first, even with their credit. Take care of your credit score. Add your children on your account. Help them start building their credit score, because then their credit becomes your credit score. Then when they graduate from high school, it's not our college. It's not like go out and get a job or just buy a car. The first thing they want is a car, but then if they don't have the credit, which they could have already had if they had your credit score, that helps them get a better opportunity where they're not paying higher car payments. Then they also have insurance scores. A lot of people don't understand you have insurance scores. So that insurance score also affects your house payment and your car payment. But if you take care of how you pay your insurance timely, if you don't let your insurance lapse, and you keep your insurance for a lengthy period, that helps your insurance, that helps your home when it's time like your taxes are going up and your homeowners is going up. That also helps your rate stay down because your insurance is not going up as high as well. Also, just educate your children. Educate them about when they get that first car payment. Make sure they pay that car payment on time, because then that affects their credit. Help them when it's time to go to college. Say, hey, do you think you want to go to college here? Well, why don't we look into buying you a property there? Then you rent it, and then you also help your friends stay there. They're paying you. Now you're creating a history. Then we look at multi-properties around here. Families used to collaborate together where they would go in and buy properties together. That's what we have to do right now. It's not about, oh, I want to get mine. Let's collaborate and buy properties together. Your kid live in one, my kid live in the other. Everybody is gaining wealth. We have to think about creating wealth, not just for us, but the next generation. But we have to educate each other and not worry about trying to, who's getting ahead. Let's help each other out. That's what families used to do, and that's what we're going to have to go back to. Families and friends, communities, buying real estate. Real estate builds wealth. So that is what all of this is about, fair housing. And Walter is right. Unless you rely on, you have to connect with the right people, because people are like, oh, I won't qualify. I got a low credit score. Guess what? You can get real estate with a 580 credit score. You just have to know how to be with the right people to help you put it together. Get in those, if you think you're gonna buy a house right now, or you're looking, get in those first-time home buyers, get your certificate. Be ready, start being prepared. But it's just things that people don't know, the steps. They wait till the last minute, like, oh, I think I'm ready. But there is a preparation to do it. And when start preparing your kids now, because next thing you know, they're out of high school. Start with your grandchildren, help your grandchildren. But there is ways to build wealth, and you don't have to do it alone. There are a lot of programs.
Thank you, Shantae. Yes, and I tell you, I take personal accountability for our community not knowing. That's on us. That's on us real estate agents. Janice, who else is a real estate agent in here? Raise your hand. That's on us. We have to meet our people where they're at. Now, I want to make a quick introduction. I've got a good friend, and we're talking about fair housing, right? But my friend's going to give us a little brief about Colorado fair housing, how we led Colorado as a state, kind of led the charge. Am I right, Tyrone? Tyrone Adams is the CEO of the Colorado Association of Realtors. The CEO of the Colorado Association of Realtors. And better than that, he's a thunderbolt. I'm just saying. Tyrone.
So, well, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tyrone Adams, as Walter said. And Walter, thank you for this opportunity. You know, when Walter and I was having breakfast over at Egg and I one day, we were talking about the Fair Housing Act. We were talking about the federal Fair Housing Act. And I said, Walter, you know, we were the first state to actually implement the Fair Housing Act before the federal Fair Housing Act. And he said, you gotta be kidding me. I said, no. So Colorado is like a pioneer in that regards, because we saw beforehand that we needed to make sure that housing was for everyone, not just for a certain group of people, right? Because if you look at our history, think back to World War I, World War II, and even think about that. When they came back home, what did they do? They separated us, right? They sent the white people over here, and they had houses, and then they sent all the other minorities over here into the projects, is what they had. And you could not cross those lines. You could not come over to the suburbs, is what we call them now. And so we had to start trying to build our own wealth. We had to start learning about our own financial literacy, those type of things. But when we talk about the Fair Housing Act, there's so many different things go into that. And we talk about the implicit bias that we all have within us. If you think about that, when you say a kindergarten teacher, what do you think of? In our own mind, we have our own bias about what that should look like. And that's what we're still dealing with today when we're talking about the appraisal gap, the wealth generation gap. When we talk about our credit scores that you're talking about, we're talking about implicit bias. Sometimes we're put in a category that is not true. And Herman, you asked about the solutions. She's right, it's about education. The government can only do so much for us, but we got to educate ourselves to make sure that we know what we need to do, that we know how to go back and make sure that if our appraisal wasn't right, where do we go to make sure that we get a better appraisal to meet our needs? Those are the type of things that we need to do. Think about Google. You can go out there and Google anything you want to out there, right? And everybody has an iPhone, right? Who doesn't have an iPhone in here? Oh, you know. Or Android too, okay, Android too. But my point is, we all have access to online information, right? There's no excuse anymore for us to be able to say, I didn't know. If you want to know something, just type it. But make sure you show yourself approved by going to ask somebody else too, because not everything online is the truth. But that's why we have these type of seminars right here, to make sure that we can bring that information to light. Credit scores, right? Think about all the different things that are coming down through the legislatures right now. How many of you guys are aware of what's going on in the legislature? Right? If you read about some of those bills, when you become a property owner, let's talk about redlining real quick. Park Hill, East Denver, that's where I grew up at. And I never understood why the same house that we were raised in had a different value somewhere else. Even going to Park Hill, because Park Hill is actually kind of a move up from East Denver. Let's just be honest. And so when we moved from East Denver to Park Hill, we were like, wow, we made it. But then all of a sudden, there's a whole new world out there. We didn't think about the suburbs. The same house in the suburbs, a little bit more. And you're like, wow, this is the same house. And I still go back to my grandmother's house on 32nd and Columbine that we were raised in. And when she sold that house, they appraised it for $125,000. And this is about 20 years ago. But for $125,000. And I said, Grandmama, you know, that's kind of too low for this house. It was a 7-bedroom house, brick, a full finished basement, great porch, great views in my opinion, but $125,000? Who wouldn't want to buy that? I didn't have the credit score at that time to buy it, you guys. Otherwise, I would have bought it. What happened was, 6 months later, after someone bought that house, they flipped it for $350,000. That same house, but the appraiser said it was only worth $105,000. So if I would have known better, my grandmother would have known better, we could have challenged that appraisal that they got and said that house is only worth $125,000. So I take it upon myself now to try to read as much as I can and learn about all these issues, so that way I can show myself approved when these type of things come up, and someone comes to tell me my house is only worth, $200,000. I could challenge that and know that it's more than that. And then call her. I'm sorry, what is your name, ma'am?
My name is Regina Jones.
All right, call Regina Jones too, all right? But I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Tyrone. Tyrone's going to be one of our panelists. We are running awfully late. Yeah, we're running awfully late. Dr. Vern, you had a comment. Please go ahead.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Everything that you're hearing here today is absolutely correct. We must be educated. However, remember the other piece of that? We must vote. You must, Tyrone was just talking about how we need to know what bills are being passed and so forth and so on. There's bills that are being passed that aren't being enforced. A lot of folks don't understand that. Walter made the comment earlier about how, redlining's been around since 1934. 1934. Tyrone is absolutely right. 5 points, historic 5 points. Most of those houses in that area were built in the 18 and early 1900s. The press convinced the people who lived there that it was the ghetto. They started selling those houses for $10,000, $20,000, $30,000. And a house this very day sitting on the corner of 24th and and Curtis, Champa, forgive me, going downtown, literally was sold to the very people who bought it for $50,000, and 6 months later sold for $600,000 with very little renovation, because we must understand the value of our property and what we have, and that comes along with voting. I'm gonna say this, and we're gonna play this video. I have to ask this question. I ask this question quite often. What are the 3 requirements to serve on a grand jury? Anybody? Pardon me? Home ownership is one. Yes, sir? Being a registered voter and an American citizen. So if you don't have home ownership, you're not at the table. The laws that are being passed that impact our community, how many of you go down to the state legislature or sit with your legislators and let them know, even the U.S. legislators, and let them know where you're at, what you feel, and where you're coming from? Keep those things in mind, folks, when we talk about home ownership, property values, and voting rights.
Thank you, Dr. Vern. Okay, it's about 11:45. Joyce, is it okay that we can just start? Okay, while you're getting lunch, we're gonna play this clip, and it's called 7 Days.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Walter. And because we're running just a little bit behind, I just want to give everyone kind of a recap of what we've got coming up next, because we're definitely going to keep getting deeper into these questions. So we'll start to grab lunch here. We'll play this clip that Regina shared with us. Then I'm going to give an overview of a statewide affordable housing strategy that's coming into response to some federal COVID money. Then Mac is going to talk to us about the intersection between housing justice and environmental justice, and some ways that going green. It can be really beneficial to homeowners and actually help to build wealth and stronger communities. And then we'll have the panel that Walter mentioned, and then we'll have a conversation with Kevin from Redress Movement Denver about mapping prejudice and starting to gather some redress and reparation strategies from you all. So,
Alrighty, and I wanted to acknowledge some leaders here, housing leaders. Miss Terry Jackson, will you please stand up? Miss Terry.
Herman, I would put forth one of the solutions, and Rashad, you were on it. And I think part of our problem is we're not suing enough. Part of our problem is we are really not challenging all of these things that are going on, right? And until we get them and hit them in their pocket, we're losing ground. So my opinion is part of it in the NAACP, and I'm hoping that there's a strategy for the NAACP to bring back their legal defense fund and really put some money into it so that we can literally start going after all of these injustices and making them pay to make them pay for what they're doing to us. So that's my solution, Herman, is that we gather enough funds, we put some money together to really go after them legally. And that's on the city basis, that's on the state basis, and that's on the federal side. So I believe that's part of the solution. And again, Rashad, if NAACP could lead us because they have the legal defense fund already established, that would be a way to really help us go forward. Thank you.
Okay, we'll start heading to lunch, and we have Kevin Marchman in the house. Kevin is a longtime veteran of housing. Oh, that's right. Oh, I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. Go ahead. What's your question?
It's more of a response to the question about resolutions. So, good afternoon, everyone. I am new to the Denver area. My name is Tiffany Roan. I am with the Deerfield Fund for Black Wealth. I received your email. My managing director sends her regards. And I wanted to point out a couple of things that were already highlighted. The education portion, understanding redlining, but also understanding the Fair Credit Reporting Act, the Community Reinvestment Act that all banks and financial institutions have to follow to keep funding. I wanted to point out the Fair Debt Practices Act, where they cannot call you before 8 a.m. or after a certain time, and you can sue them if they try to do that. There are laws that are in place. The Consumer Financial Protection Bureau was established under the Obama administration to help with predatory lending. And so some of these things are already in place. It's just our opportunity to utilize them to their full extent. They have free brochures, they have free literature, and many of the organizations around the U.S., like Operation Hope, financial empowerment centers, do offer some of these resolutions in pertaining to credit analysis. But getting deeper to see what the systemic issues that we have dealt with for decades allow. I am originally from Nashville, Tennessee, right outside Nashville, Tennessee, so I apologize for what you're seeing in the news about us as of right now. But perfect example, my family owned a home in the Wedgwood area. We call it Wedgwood. It's called 24 South. It's something real fancy now. My great aunt purchased that home for $12,000 in the mid-'70s as a school teacher for Metro Nashville schools. It appraised last year as she gifted it down to me and her son for $785,000. It's not even 2,000 square feet. It's not even 2,000 square feet. So there is benefit in retaining land because we're not making land anymore. The Lord is like, we're done with this. Let me move on to something else. So there is power in understanding what you have and utilizing it to its full extent. But there's also power in understanding what has happened before so we don't make that mistake again. That was it. Thank you. It's a little dry. A little dry, but I am thoroughly enjoying. It is completely different in pertaining to like the attitudes and progression that we deal with in the South. So I completely understand what is happening here. Let me assure you, it is probably 3 or 4 times as worse as what we are dealing with in the Nashvilles, in the Birminghams, in the Houstons, in those areas. And while those are thriving black cities, as you can tell from recent news, the state legislature continues to put their foot right on our necks. But there's change that's happening. So, yes. So this is usually Aisha's thing, and I will get her when I see her. The Deerfield Fund was established to help close the racial wealth gap for Black and African American families in the Metro Denver area. We expand to 6 eligible counties, but we are talking about expanding further within the state. So how the Deerfield Fund works is that you are going to go to one of the preferred lenders, and we're continuing to add lenders each time, and you will apply for your loan, and you will ask about the Deerfield funds that happen there. With the Deerfield funds, you are given up to $40,000. You are loaned up to $40,000 or 15% of whatever that appraiser value is, and that acts as a silent second for your home. After you have moved into the home and you're comfortable in everything, there is a payback portion. You will pay back what you have borrowed plus 5% of the fully appreciated value. So it does not include your sweat equity, just what is showing on paper from the appreciated value. Those funds go back into Deerfield to help other families. So there is no kind of kickback. We are there to really take those funds to go, thank you so much. You have refinanced, this is no longer your primary home, and now we're moving forward to help other families. On top of that, what we are creating is a wraparound service organization where we are talking to and helping and recruiting financial advisors, estate planners, appraisers, individuals who help with not only the homeownership experience, but also the wealth building experience, because we want your grandchildren's children's children to have the same benefits that the J.W. Marriotts and the Rockefellers and the Hiltons have. So our goal is to provide holistic financial racial wealth gap coverage. And so that's what we're working to build out now. And we're starting it through the process of homeownership.
Few in the nation believe that fair housing would in our time become the unchallenged law of this land. And indeed, this bill has had a long and stormy trip.
Well, I don't know what will happen now. We've got some difficult days ahead. Like anybody, I would like to live a long life. Longevity has its place. But I'm not concerned about that now. And I've looked over and I've seen the promised land. I may not get there with you, but I want you to know tonight that we as a people will get to the promised land. So I'm happy tonight. I'm not worried about anything. I'm not fearing any man.
Ladies and gentlemen, Martin Luther King was shot and was killed tonight in Memphis.
The death of the prophet of nonviolence set off the worst outbreak of arson, looting, and criminal activity in the nation's history. Washington's ghettos burned within a few blocks of the nation's capital.
The life of a man who symbolized the freedom and faith of America has been taken. And no words of mine can of the eloquent voice that has been stilled. But this I do believe deeply. The dream of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. has not died with him.
President Johnson was willing to speak up and say, we have to pass a fair housing bill.
Hello, Mr. President? Yes, Dick. We're in trouble. We need some help. Yes? I'm afraid of that.
Federal troops, for the first time since the Civil War, took up positions to guard government buildings.
Nothing's probably touchier than your own neighborhood and your own home or your own apartment. The administration, which supported the bill, said this has no chance. The other stuff is okay, but this will kill any politician that touches it.
Well, I just could not live beside them. I don't feel that they should be oppressed. But I moved here because it was a white community. I have 2 daughters and 2 sons. And if there's too many colored people around here, I definitely will get out. I think that, well, the property values will immediately go down if they're allowed to move in here in any number.
It seems as though our country is pulling apart into separate societies, where whites have jobs and Negroes have unemployment, where the middle class lives in suburbs and the poor are left in the ghettos, where one group of Americans looks upon another group of Americans with growing mistrust and even dread.
Then the bill went over into the House Rules Committee, and under the chairmanship of the famous Judge Smith, a right-wing segregationist from Virginia, he wouldn't hold hearings on it. He would take the bill home so nobody could act on it, and we were running out of time.
Thousands flowed through the rainy streets of Memphis this day, finishing a march that Dr. King planned to lead in support of striking garbage workers.
How many men must die before we can really have a free and true and peaceful society?
For your presence, Lord. And I know you'll reach out and take mine. You take our hand.
The death of Martin Luther King is a tragic thing, but no legislation should be passed as a memorial to anyone.
In spite of the riots, I am going to support this legislation with all the vigor that I possess.
The laws that we pass up here are for all time. The Martin Luther Kings come and go.
The public reaction to this horror gave the sensible members of the committee a compelling argument that the House Rules Committee had to report that bill out. And I think that's how we got our bill. They just didn't dare bottle it up any longer.
And I have a dream that one day Negroes will be able to buy a house anywhere that their money will carry them.
At long last this afternoon, fair housing for all is now a part of the American way of life. Democracy's work is being done, and the bell of freedom rings out a little louder. We have come some of the way, not near all of it.
The fight still goes on because we unfortunately have the laws, but we don't have the enforcement. That we have changed, but we still have the same kinds of discrimination.
The U.S. Commission on Civil Rights said today that efforts by federal agencies to end housing discrimination have been generally superficial or incomplete.
President Carter has ordered federal agencies to use all means possible to strengthen fair housing programs.
For the first time, people with disabilities and families with children will be protected from housing discrimination.
President Reagan signed legislation today designed to toughen up the nation's fair housing laws.
Why did you take part in this demonstration today? Just because there was a huge crowd, or did you have any personal reason?
Well, I took part in this march today because of Martin Luther King and what he stood for, because this march is what he died for.
You know what he stood for?
Yes. He stood for nonviolence and peace for all men of all kinds. And I think if he died for it, I could carry out what he started.
Celebrities doing long, boring cardio or cutting out food groups? Because it doesn't work. Cardio shoots up our hunger hormone ghrelin, which means we just end up eating more later. And cutting out whole food groups like carbs isn't sustainable. That's why those things haven't worked for you in the past. So how do they get those radical transformations? Well, they use a little-known way to flush out disruptors, sabotaging their metabolism. I saw one of your most recent posts. 65 pounds down, is that right? 68 now, but yeah. Because I've surpassed my original goal. My original goal was 60 pounds. I'm at 68. So how do we figure out what's slowing down our metabolism type and then speed it up? Let me show you. Okay, next. Imagine this container of water is our metabolism. And right now, the water is clear, which means we have a fast metabolism. We are at our goal weight, we look good, and we feel good. But then this shows up, and this represents metabolism and hormone disruptors. What are disruptors? Well, disruptors hide in lots of foods. They even hide in so-called healthy foods, and even in some beauty products. And when we're exposed to these disruptors, it can cause our metabolism to slow down, and even our hormones to suddenly go whack. Just look, our metabolism and our hormones are all gunked up. This means we're now gaining weight. We have food cravings and excess hunger. We start to get those stubborn areas like around our bellies that we can't seem to get rid of. And so many of us women are told to just diet and exercise to fix these problems. But watch, if we're just dieting and exercising, you can see that not much happens. And that's because we haven't fixed the root cause of the problems. And the root cause of that problem is our metabolism and hormones are still gunked up with disruptors. So until we fix this, we may see a little progress, but then the weight just comes right back. And as the years go by, we're exposed to more and more disruptors. This is why so many women fail, and then they think the problem is their age. But the good news is age doesn't have to stop us. Once we fix this, we can start to see amazing results again. So what do we do to get a faster metabolism? Well, first, we need to find out what our own metabolic disruptors are. Because we all have a unique metabolism, and we have disruptors that are specific to us. And we can find our own metabolism disruptors with an easy metabolism test. And when we cut out our disruptors, start to reset our metabolism. Watch, we do a metabolic reset, and look, the disruptors start to vanish and our metabolism is clear again. So now, those stubborn areas, they can finally start to go away. The number on the scale can go down again, and we have energy, we can look good, and we can feel our best. And watch, if we're exposed to disruptors again, we're fine. Our metabolism can handle it. So, how do we get a complete list of our disruptors, know what to eat, and then start to see success? Well, me and my clients, we use the Fabulous 5 metabolism cards, because these cards, they list out all the different metabolism types and the disruptors that affect each type. And these cards, they also list boosting foods for each metabolism type too. So here's how it works. You'll take the quick metabolism test I'll give you when you get your cards. We find out your metabolism type, and then you follow the section on your cards that's right for your type. It's so easy. And these cards, they fit right in any purse, or they can go on your fridge so you know exactly what to eat and what to avoid that is best for your results. Now, normally they sell for $25, but I'm giving away a few thousand sets for the next little while. I want to help even more women, so I'm giving away a small supply of the Fabulous 5 metabolism.
We hope everyone's had a few minutes to chat with each other and start getting some lunch. I want to give a really warm thank you to Joyce from Elegant Catering. Lunch is so beautiful. And we're going to move the program along in just about 5 minutes. We're going to hear from Mac from the City and County of Denver. If, as you're getting your food, you want to move up closer, please feel free to do so. There's a lot of slides in the next few presentations that we have.
So many places in my life and time. I've sung a lot of songs, I've made some bad rhymes, I've acted out my life in stages with 10,000 people watching. But we're alone now, and I'm singing this song to you. I know your image of me is what I hope to be. I treated you unkindly, but darling, can't you see? There's no one more important to me. Baby, can't you see through me? 'Cause we're alone now, and I'm I'm singing this song to you. You taught me precious secrets of a true love, holding nothing. You came out in front when I was hiding. Now I'm so much better, and if my words don't come together, listen to the melody, 'cause my love is in there hiding.
Welcome back, everyone. So next up in our agenda for the afternoon, as you're coming back from lunch, we're going to chat with Mac Prather, who is from the city and county of Denver. You can't hear me? Can you hear me now? Okay, cool. So welcome back from lunch, everyone. Next, we're going to hear from Mac Prather. He's from the city and county of Denver and going to be talking to us about the Healthy Homes program, which is a green housing initiative through the city and county of Denver.
Thank you. Hey, Lauren. Good afternoon, everybody. Can you guys hear me okay? Can you hear me? Okay, thank you so much for the invitation to be here and over lunch, speak with you all. The lunch was great, so I hope you all are enjoying that. I'm going to go real quick through our Healthy Homes program, and then I'm available to answer questions to y'all. This information is really focused on City and County of Denver. There's some information and some learnings that are more broadly applicable, but if you're in City and County of Denver, if you know folks there, please find me afterwards. I'd be happy to talk to you. So, as you mentioned, I'm coming to y'all from the Office of Climate Action, Sustainability, and Resiliency in Denver. There's a little bit of background information here that I'm just going to breeze through. The funding for our office was part of something that was voted in by Denver voters a number of years ago. It's a sales tax initiative. Let's go to the next slide. All of that funding is going for climate action, sustainability, resiliency. Hopefully we can get these slides out so that you all could reference that information later if you're interested. But there are a few allowable uses for that funding in Denver, and I just want to highlight a couple of them. There's funding available for environmental and climate justice programs, and then way down at the end of that list, upgrades for energy efficiency in homes. That's the link to what we're talking about today, housing. Next slide. So to frame it all up, in Denver, 64% of the emissions are from buildings. Most of that is from a portion of the largest buildings in the city, about the largest 6,000 buildings, but a substantial amount is from those single-family homes. 15% of the emissions in Denver are from single-family homes. We know that that's up to the homeowner. We're lucky to live in Denver and in Colorado because Xcel Energy is obligated by law to reduce the amount of emissions in their generation. So the choices that we make to heat and cool our homes, to use that electrical energy, really do make a difference in terms of the climate emissions. Next slide. And this is just a map of Denver. We were talking about this over lunch. I think the message I want to say today is this map is about vulnerability to air quality. So there's a number of indicators that went into making this map to show where folks in Denver are more vulnerable to poor air quality. And if you look at the map, it's apparent that a lot of those places are places that are historically redlined areas. Some of those areas are the same. It's not anything that would necessarily be surprising, but the message is just that these issues are all interconnected. We're talking about housing, but that's connected to air quality, it's connected to health, it's connected to climate justice, and that's why this is important. The good news, and what I want to talk to you about today, is that the technology is here to help make that change. There's technology that is healthier for your indoor air quality, it's better for the environment. In many cases, it's cheaper to run, it makes your home more comfortable. And so if you're interested in getting rid of your old furnace, your old Wheezy furnace, your old gas stove, and getting some of that newer technology into your home, I would be happy to be a resource to you and talk you through that. Thank you. Just some additional facts. 30 to 40% of low-income families' homes in Denver fail carbon monoxide emissions tests. That's a huge percentage. And so that shows that this old equipment that burns fossil fuels has an effect in the house, and it disproportionately is affecting people in Denver who don't have the means to get that old equipment out of the house. Next slide. The program that our office is working on to start addressing some of those issues, get into homes and do retrofits, is called our Healthy Homes program. And we're working with Energy Outreach Colorado and Block Power. Energy Outreach Colorado is a local nonprofit. They do energy bill assistance. They have a bunch of programs that are helpful. They're a great resource for you to know. Block Power is a tech company. They're a Black-owned company out of New York, and we're really glad to work with them on this program as well. Next slide. And so if you've seen any of the headlines about gas stoves, if you've been listening to the radio, you know this is more popular now, but there's a huge body of evidence that's beginning to show that gas in your home is really bad for your health, especially kids, especially older folks. Burning that methane in your kitchen, in your furnace, can have a real effect on your health. And Lauren is actually here from Physicians for Social Responsibility. They have great data on that. If you're interested in that issue area, please let her be a resource to you. Yeah. So the goals of this program in Denver are to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. That's what we talked about. 2, to improve indoor air quality by getting those gas appliances out of homes. And 3, to reduce vulnerability by adding cooling with those heat pumps, that new technology. This is all funded by that Climate Protection Fund that I mentioned, and that is for everyone in City and County of Denver. With Energy Outreach Colorado and Block Power, we are electrifying 100 single-family homes and 100 multifamily units as part of this program for the next 3 years. So some takeaways that I'd like you all to know. If you know anyone in the City and County of Denver who is a homeowner or a renter who is making below 80% area median income and they're living with a health condition, if they have asthma, if they have a kid in the house that has asthma or a COPD or some respiratory issue, please let them know about this program. Those are the folks that we want to enroll in this program, work with those partners, and replace that gas equipment with the new electric technology. All of this is at no cost to the homeowner or the renter. And this is my contact information. So that's a real quick overview. I also want to offer that I'm happy to be a resource to anybody in the room. If you're interested in getting that fossil fuel gas out of your home, I would be happy to help you figure out how to do that. There are incentives from Inflation Reduction Act. Denver has its own incentives for this equipment, and it's complicated. It's hard to understand all those programs. Julia from Julia, if you want to wave, from NAACP has put together a great trifold that's on your seat that summarizes those incentives for electric heating and cooling equipment. And if you need help navigating that, please reach out to me. I think Julia will be a resource to you as well. And I'll take a couple questions for a few minutes. Yes, sir. Question was, do renters have to have landlord agreement for the program? Yeah, for this program, that's correct. They would. Block Power will work with the building owner, and they'll kind of negotiate a contract. Denver subsidizes that work through the program, but we work specifically with the renters as well. So there's some education about the new equipment, but it's a great question. Yes, ma'am.
We're going to end up putting in about $50,000 to $75,000 to refit these homes, and it is free. So that whole part about getting your name on the list, becoming one of those, if you have an older home in Park Hill, if your mother, somebody that you know, your auntie, your mother, your uncle, your dad, anybody that has a home, 80% AMI, and that's, I mean, it's, they can be eligible for this program. And as part of it, again, my company is going to be doing that work. So you're going to have people coming into your home that will respect your home, that looks like you, and that understands what we're trying to do here. So really, you guys, if we don't, this is a program that we really need to take advantage of, right? I'm talking to 75,000, you get a new heater, you get new electrical, you get a new electrical panel, you get new HVAC, you get all of that, and it's all paid for free. So,
it's, the scope of work is major. It's a big deal, and so we want to be sure we're reaching the right people with this program, in the right areas, people with respiratory conditions. So thank you. We're excited to work with you all. Other questions? There was another one. Yes, ma'am.
Housing.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious, as a renter, as somebody who's probably going to rent for the rest of their lives, maybe not, but how are landlords responding to this? One fear that I have is, as we're making all of these updates to homes as renters, that landlords might say like, oh, well, you know, we're making all of these updates, we could draw people in to ultimately raise rent prices.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious if there have been any examples in working with landlords for getting these updates to rental properties and how that's gone.
Thank you. That's a great question. That's part of the reason we're rolling out the multifamily part of the program a little slower, is because we're aware of that. We're working on it with building owners. The single family folks, everybody that's participating so far is a homeowner, and they've owned those homes for generally quite a while. So we're moving forward there, but we are working with the landlords to look at where it's naturally occurring affordable housing. So where it's not deed restricted or already restricted. If it's naturally occurring, we're negotiating some restrictions for rent increases and for retention. So we're looking at both goals, performance-based, and some restrictions that we can apply to there. We're working with hosts, we're working with others, but that's part of the program as well. Because we're doing 100 units, we want to see what kind of protections we can apply there, and then scale that as we do more programs in Denver. It's a great question. Yes, ma'am.
The carbon monoxide testing and those results, yes. Do we have any data on how that has affected those homeowners or those households in relation to the respiratory issues?
Yes. Every home that goes through this program will have air quality testing done before the intervention and after. And we're going to be sitting down with those homeowners to talk through their symptoms, to actually understand the effects that they see and how they would communicate that. There's some great data that Physicians for Social Responsibility has on the actual health effects of having a gas stove or having a furnace. But one thing we will hope to do with this program is share some case studies that demonstrate how that newer equipment, the heat pump, the induction stove, can reduce those pollutants in your home. Did that answer your question? Okay. And if you have other questions, my cards are in the back. There's information on the program. Take flyers. We have English and Spanish language flyers, so you can take those with you, take a picture, give those to those people that you know, and my card is back there as well. So if you have questions later about how to get that old gas furnace out of your house, I'd be happy to work with you on that. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Mac. I love hearing about that. I want to also thank who is here to represent our Environmental and Climate Justice Committee for making sure that we're making those connections between housing and the environment really clear. So again, my name is Addison. I'm on the Housing Committee for the Rocky Mountain NAACP. Right now I'm finishing my master's degree in urban and regional planning at CU Denver, and one of my focuses there has been on housing. My capstone project, getting ready to graduate in May, has been to work, thank you, I'm ready. My capstone is working with an organization called NeighborWorks Alliance of Texas. And that is a group of 12 organizations from different counties that are all working on affordable housing in Texas. And I lost my train of thought. They're looking specifically at how we could use federal funding from the American Rescue Plan Act, which came out of COVID, to finance affordable housing. And unfortunately, what we found in Texas is that Texas is one of the only states that did not allocate any money of their ARPA money towards housing. And in fact, Colorado is actually a pretty good case study of what to do. So that was some good news, and I want to share with you today what that framework looks like. So Colorado received $550 million for affordable housing from the American Rescue Plan Act. About a fifth of that has gone into Denver. One of the larger projects to come out of that funding, $50 million of it was used to create the Colorado Affordable Housing Transformation Task Force, and then to create a affordable housing toolkit for elected representatives, developers, and community housing advocates to understand how to navigate and implement all of these resources that are being made available. I apologize, there's a lot of text in these slides, so I'll do my best to convey what's on the slides, but I'm more than happy to email this to anyone at the end of the day as well. So ARPA has 7 expenditure categories. Many of them relate back to housing. Public health, negative economic impacts, disproportionately impacted communities, premium pay, doesn't really apply to this conversation, infrastructure, revenue replacement, and administrative funding for additional burdens caused by the COVID-19 pandemic. So there's a few places where housing fit really clearly into those expenditure categories. The first is under negative economic impacts. Money has been designated for housing assistance in this category, and that spans things from sort of general household needs, from food programs to utilities, cash transfers, so cash payments to help people, make up a gap in a month or two of rent. Generally, those are pretty small. Internet and broadband access programs, and eviction prevention. So, in a longer conversation, when we had more time, I think it's really important to raise the questions that this, legislation opens up for us. And so, going forward into the upcoming year for the Housing Committee, we want to make sure that we're asking questions like, which forms of housing assistance are we prioritizing locally, whether that's in our branch or our neighborhood, and how can we sort of leverage those ideas to make some changes together going forward. The third category is disproportionately impacted communities. So this is housing support for people who are at the lowest area median income, AMI, services for people experiencing homelessness, and then there is not a lot of language that is specific to race or ethnicity in this legislation, but when you read a lot of the successful funding proposals, both from Colorado and from other states, it's clear that there is a really strong precedent for supporting communities of color specifically within this legislation. And in truth, it's really a requirement to do that. So some of the questions that come along with that are really questioning what our community's criteria for affordable housing are. In working with the NeighborWorks Alliance of Texas, they echoed a common theme that I think we hear in Colorado all the time. People see new developments go up that are labeled as affordable housing, and the rents still seem so high that there's this huge gap between what we call affordable housing. It's based on an area median income, usually a whole county, and doesn't really translate for people in their neighborhood or on their block. So there's some room here to really push what those definitions are going to be going forward, and to put some pressure on our county and our city governments to do that. There is also infrastructural money, so water, energy, broadband. One of the questions around this that I would like some clarity on, and maybe we can dig into this together as the year goes on, is what portion of these infrastructure funds can be used to offset some of the development costs for things like water, energy, broadband, and is that going to be a feasible way of bringing development costs down, or are those funds intended for a different use? And I'm bringing that question because it's something that's still unclear to me. And if anyone has some better insight into that, I would love to connect with you so we can communicate that accurately out to the community. And then there are some additional tools. One is small business assistance. There's a lot of directions that can go. Evaluation and data analysis, I think, is one of the most important that might be getting overlooked the most often. When we think about money into affordable housing, we often think about the money to actually build the thing, which of course is needed, or the money to subsidize the rent, which is also very important. But we sometimes forget collectively that there's actually money to do that community planning process together, to make sure that everyone's voices are represented. So that's one of my primary interests on the housing community, or excuse me, the housing committee, is to think about how we can access some of those planning grants to do that work with the NAACP and other partners. Well, I'm sorry, this graphic is not going to translate well on a screen. But basically, this is a graphic from the National Conference of State Legislatures, and it shows how all of this federal money has been allocated so far. The takeaway from this slide is that 4.5% of ARPA funds have gone to housing. So I think that that's a pretty small amount and something worth thinking about and pushing as we keep going forward. This next slide also not going to translate well onto that screen, but this is a tool that I want all of us to be aware of. This is, again, from the National Conference of State Legislatures, and they have a state fiscal recovery funds allocations tracker. So what this means is you can put in your state and your topic or issue of interest, so housing, education, water infrastructure, and you can pull all of the successfully funded proposals that have been made for your state and every other state. So this is useful twofold. One, of course, we need to know where that money has gone in the state of Colorado, but what we're, part of what we're working on with NeighborWorks Alliance of Texas is not all of our communities are all the way there yet in putting forward their proposals. And so it's a really valuable tool to be able to say, this is what other urban areas with a similar political climate to Denver have been able to put through using ARPA funds. This is what Colorado has been able to do in rural areas. So that's what we want to share with Texas that's having similar challenges. So I think it's going to provide a way for us to eliminate some of, well, I don't know if eliminate's the right word, but it's really going to help us to keep the momentum going in terms of the legwork, the research, and the writing that needs to be done in order to access and leverage these funds. So this is just a snapshot of some of the types of programs that were funded in Colorado. I boxed out here that some of these programs, they have a specific requirement that the funding prioritizes minority and women-owned businesses or households. So, I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought again. There's a lot of information in a short amount of time. So then this is a dashboard from the city and county of Denver that shows how those housing funds from ARPA are actually being allocated. And this is useful for us as the NAACP, I think, so that we can sort of align our priorities and our message on the one hand, to where the funding is, so we can take advantage of that, but also so that we can look at this chart and say, hey, these are the gaps. We can see it on the chart. This is where we need to go next. And so in Denver, the funds have been sparsed out between things like affordable housing, encampment resolution for people experiencing homelessness, housing justice pipeline support, housing stability programs, tiny home capacity building. So there's a lot of different areas here that we can plug into in our own organizing. So as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the bodies to come out of this funding was the Colorado Affordable Housing Transformational Task Force. And I'd like to give you an overview of the top recommendations that came out of this report at the end of last year. The first is that every household should have access to housing for less than 30% of their annual household income, the 1/3 income standard. That's pretty familiar. We have a need to revitalize the housing stock, not only through new construction, but through affordable housing preservation. I think that's where programs like the one that Mac introduced us to can really help to make that connection. There's a need to prioritize workforce housing and transit-oriented development. Then the report also specifically says that there is a need to address known racism in appraisal rates and predatory loan practices. I did not wordsmith that. It is written into the task force recommendation, and this is now a legal planning document. Build and support opportunities for generational wealth is a topic that's come up many times today. Addressing homelessness through infrastructure and support services, and eliminating barriers to affordable housing development. So that's when we're getting into the nitty-gritty of, what's preventing affordable housing from being built? Are the parking requirements too strict? Are there zoning barriers? Occupancy limits. In Denver, there's a great piece that went through City Council to get rid of occupancy limits, like for very large family household sizes, but also to create a new code around what's considered group living facilities. In the past, it used to be that housing for people with disabilities, housing for people experiencing homelessness, and housing for people who were formerly incarcerated were all subject to different standards, and it made it really easy to discriminate against projects for people who were formerly incarcerated, for example, rather than, or in a different way than people with disabilities. And so this new code adjustment, without getting too far into it today, made all types of group living situations on an equal playing field. So you can't have different rules for different kinds of group homes, essentially. That was a really important change. That occurred before the Housing Transformational Task Force, but now we just have that extra in to be able to address some of those disparities. And then I think one of the most important things to come out of this task force is the first really formal high-level report that I've read that actually insists that we have to reassess the definition of affordable housing. And I think we're used to seeing that among community housing advocates, but not in these high-level documents with 16-person committees that are overseeing them at the state and federal level. So I think that that's, it has the potential to be a really important turning point. I've lost track of where I am on time. Give me just 1 second. Okay. Then the other thing to come out of this funding was the Affordable Housing Toolkit for local officials. And I wish it was just called the Affordable Housing Toolkit. I think this information is so useful to anyone that is interested and committed to furthering affordable housing. Let me see if I can pull up. And I want to show you what this looks like, because basically they have created all of these different modules on things like affordable housing finance basics. So it sounds like there's a lot of people in this room for whom affordable housing financing is their field of expertise. But for many of us coming from a sort of lower level, we're still trying to learn what that language is. And this gives us something very pointed to be able to frame our conversations around and to take to our elected representatives. So they've put out multiple of these modules. They include closed captioning, they include video, they include links to other resources, so that we can all start using the same language around things like development practices, land use, zoning, how to create a pro forma for an affordable housing project to make sure that the numbers for our projects really line up with what's possible and what's feasible. So I wish there was more time to go into the many resources that are provided on this website, but for now it will kind of have to be enough to just show you the tools. Yeah, you can't see it on the sidebar, but the modules are Affordable Housing 101, Groundwork and Positioning, Development and Land Use Planning, Housing Funding and Financing, Housing Programs and Partnership, Local Housing Policy, and it just keeps going. So really great tools to continue our education together. Another reason I'm showing you this today is because starting on the first Tuesday of May, Walter and I will be hosting an all-member housing meeting. So any member from any organization, or from any branch, excuse me, and your invited guests are welcome to join us. And these modules are an example of something that we'll be covering together, so we can all share that information together. All right, so that's what I have to share with you in terms of some of the newer resources that are available. We have, maybe 5-6 minutes for questions. What questions can I answer for you about this today? Yes?
About affordable housing. We often hear about affordable housing, which is not actually affordable if you really look at it. But what about sustainability? You never hear anyone talk about sustainability in housing. And the reason I ask that question is because the builders, the contractors, or whoever they are, they come in and they build housing and apartments, and they use materials that are not healthy for those individuals that move into those homes. And no one talks about sustainability, but they always say, well, we don't say that because of the cost. But for a long-term effect, health-wise and sustainability-wise, you spend less putting funds into housing and using city resources, state and federal resources, if they were built to be sustainable when they are built. So in the long run, you're saving money, you're saving the environment because you're not putting all this stuff into a landfill. So my question is, why isn't that part of affordable housing?
I think that's a great question. It looked like you might want to add to that question, or? Okay, cool. Well, I would like to say that I'm an expert in that topic, and I want to acknowledge that I'm not. But I know that there are some efforts in place. So Denver has what's called the Green Building Ordinance. And there's been a lot of pushback to that ordinance for the same reasons that you just described, but it is, a piece of planning policy that we have in place, and the city is working through some ways to incentivize that. Some of the incentives are sort of the standard incentives around things like parking reduction and additional height allowances for greater density, things like that. I think this is also, though, where our continuing to do our community education in rooms like this is so important, because there are some things that are just clear cost savers, like recycling gray water to water, using the water from wash machines and sinks to then irrigate the landscaping so you can still have a beautiful garden and beautiful yard, or xeriscaping, etc. So there are like these pockets of ideas that are in place to help us do that, but they don't always make it into the final plans, and that's where our voice is so important, just insisting that they're there at the front of the table all the time.
So with all of your research and everything, what's the one thing that we should be really paying attention to in the legislation? And then where do you think is the greatest opportunity for our community to take advantage of this current legislation and the money that's coming out?
I really appreciate that question, and I feel nervous to answer it because I'm very early on in the stages of my own learning. And so that's why I'm so grateful to have all of you as experts in this room so that we can figure that out together. And with some more of your input, one of the things that I'm committed to doing on the committee is being able to take some of your direction and doing some of the legwork on that research. So if you can help me to ask some of the right questions, I can help you to get some of the answers, and I hope that we can go back and forth on that. I do have a personal opinion that I've stated a few times now, though, and this idea about redefining affordable housing itself is the most important thing we can be doing. And I'm a mapping specialist, and when I look at what's happening on a map, I think we need to be thinking about those solutions at the block group level. We need to target neighborhoods, and then we need to talk in terms of, we need to contextualize in terms of neighborhoods, and we need to target our investment and our strategy at the block group level. One of the reasons that that's important is because that's the standardized level at which we have the data to track the changes over time, which is something I'd be really happy to talk about in greater depth at another time.
Okay, well, thank you, Addis.
You're welcome.
Addison. Okay, well, we're on the last stretch of our program. We're going to queue up special documentary. We've been talking about redlining. We've been talking about what is it and what are some of the tactics that are employed and who is doing this. So we're getting ready to queue up a documentary that's called America Lowballed. And so are we ready to cue that up? Okay. Has anybody heard any stories about lowball appraisals in black community? Around the country. Not only around the country, right here in Colorado. And so one of my guests, his name is Robbie Wilson. And I don't know if Robbie is still hanging in there with us, but Robbie Wilson is an appraiser, Black American appraiser, and he's the head of the Appraiser Association through NARAB. He's the head of a Black Appraisers Association through NARAB. And I'm going to see if Robbie is still on the line, because there is a report that's called PAVE, where Congress made some changes on how appraisals are done, conducted. In California, they just incorporated where appraisers have to go through diversity training, okay? And so there's a lot of changes that's being made with that. And I'm gonna just wanna call Robbie and see if he's still there. Yo, Robbie? Yeah? You have some friends here and you're not here. He's trying to log in, Robbie Wilson. And I sent Robbie Wilson. There's a Zoom link that I sent to Robbie. So he's on, there's a Zoom link.
Yeah, I already tried Zoom, but it's still suffering us.
Okay.
We need to be ready.
Okay, we're gonna figure this out, Brother Robbie. Vern, what should we do? This is Robbie. The link that you sent me to send him, he's ready to join them. Okay, Robbie, bear with us, okay? This has been a real good program today.
Okay, that's good. Well, it says waiting for the host to start the meeting for the last hour, like 7 minutes.
Okay.
I called you, text you too at 1:05.
Right. Okay. Robbie's bio is in the program. If you would want to take a look at that, he's part of a lot of legislation amendments and just where we're headed with these what can we do about appraisals and lowball appraisals? One of the things he's really interested in getting young folks into the appraisal business, and I think that's one of the solutions to brother Herman. What are some of the solutions? And if we can get our community to into that industry, that is an excellent industry. Robbie, what is the average age of the appraiser right now?
Okay, that was on. It's about 62 or 64, between 62 and 64. I think it's 62.
Okay. The average age of an appraiser is 64, about 64 years old. And what is the percentage of white appraisers?
According to census, about at least 95%.
Okay, say that again.
According to the census data, it's at least 95%.
95% of appraisers are white appraisers. How many is black American appraisers?
Less than 2%.
Less than 2%. If you have a youngster right now, and one thing about what Robbie is leading the group, they are going into HBCUs and recruiting, sharing in this opportunity. There's no student debt involved in becoming an appraiser. I mean, it's an excellent opportunity for our next generation to get involved. Ready to okay, we're still waiting. So can we queue up the low ball? Can we queue up that documentary? So Robbie, I briefly mentioned the report that was the PAVE report. Can you share with our listening audience what that report is?
Yes. Basically, the pay report, that's the PAVE report, is the pay report. This report was gathered by the Biden administration. It's referred to as the pay task force. There are 13 federal agencies and offices involved in the task force. So basically, they looked into the issue of appraisal bias and discrimination, and they came up with some recommendation and action plan to make the industry better or to improve on the racial and ethnic bias in home valuation. So basically, the pay report is just an action plan for federal agencies to implement. Hopefully, you make things better or reduce bias in the industry. That's the short version of it.
I know. Is there any other states beside California that is requiring appraisers to go through diversity training?
The answer is a lot of states are working on coming up with some type of diversity training. Right now, some states are ahead. I'm not sure if California is the only state, but I know California is one state that requires it. But most of the states are working on developing, even including the Appraisal Foundation, developing some course curriculum for diversity and bias training.
We're going to entertain a question right here. The question is, we're going into HBCUs to introduce them to the appraisal industry. What is required, from your knowledge, Robbie, that anybody who's interested in getting into that industry?
That's an excellent question. I appreciate that. Basically, let's look at it. As I like to say, there's basically 3 E's. The letter E's. One E is for education, another E is for experience, and the third E is for exam. So when we go to when we talk to different communities or different groups, we talk about the education side of it, which is the first thing you got to do. And that education is basically the different levels of license that's required. So every license category have a different education requirement. To be a licensed appraiser, you need 150 hours of education. And then to be certified, you need 200 hours of education. And to be certified general, which basically do mostly commercial appraisers or non-residential appraisers, you need 300 hours. But the minimum education requirement is 150 hours. You know, now, to be licensed appraiser, you don't have to have a college degree. You just need to complete the education of 150 hours. But to be certified general, you definitely have to have a degree. But to be certified residential, in some cases you need a degree, some cases you don't need a degree. It's a little complex to go through all the different steps. But you have to have a minimum of 30 hours of college education. So just to repeat myself, there are 3 levels of education commitment that you have to have. Either 150 hours, 200 hours, 300 hours, depending on the license or certification you're seeking. And for the licensed appraiser, you don't need a college degree. But for the certified, you need some college.
Okay. Robbie, we're getting ready to play the clip, America Lowball, and we want you to see if you can just log in again.
Okay, I'll try.
Okay. We're going to take a look at this clip called America Lowball.
The property was never the question. It was who was occupying the property at the time of the appraisal that was the question.
He actually appraised my house for lower than I purchased it for, over $20,000 lower.
Many minority homeowners claim racial bias is holding them back in the real estate market.
The only thing bringing down the value of my home was me.
With allegations of appraisers lowballing the value of their homes.
There was so much on the line. If the house didn't appraise for a certain amount of money, then we wouldn't be able to move forward.
Tanisha Tate Austin and husband Paul are just 2 of several homeowners profiled in the new ABC News documentary, Our America Lowball. Executive producer and ABC Bay Area reporter Julian Glover spent almost 2 years investigating alleged home appraisal bias.
What we found after looking at more than 50 million refinance applications for home loan mortgages is that in predominantly black neighborhoods, they're almost 5 times more likely to be lowballed or underappraised in an appraisal than in predominantly white communities.
The Austins own their home in Marin City, a diverse and historically black neighborhood north of San Francisco. In 2020, the couple hoped to take advantage of low mortgage rates and refinance. Their home was appraised by a white woman.
I was the one that was here at the house. I felt like we had a good rapport.
The appraiser valued their home at just under $1 million, far less than what they'd expected.
It was devastating. This is not okay. I know that the house is worth more than this.
The Austins are not alone. A new study found homes in white neighborhoods appraised at twice the value of homes in communities of color on average, for $371,000 more. Housing and Urban Development Secretary Marcia Fudge says those lower values create a chain reaction.
I live in a black community, a community that I very much like. But when my house is not valued properly, my schools don't get the kind of tax dollars they should receive. Our city doesn't get the tax dollars they should receive, and so we don't have the same level of police and fire.
After the Austins petitioned to get a second appraisal, they asked their white friend Jan McDougal to stand in as Tanisha and put away personal items, a strategy known as whitewashing.
Whitewashing is the idea of removing yourself from your home home, taking down your family pictures, your artwork, your hair products, your clothing, your shoes, anything that could lead someone to saying, I think this person might be black. I think this person might be Latino.
The suspicion was clearly that the house was being devalued because of the homeowner's race. And so, I understood that I was standing in to be a white homeowner to see if that had any impact on the appraisal value. And so the house had to look like it was actually my house.
With Jan as Tanisha, their home was reappraised for nearly $500,000 more. The Austins still feeling the pain of having to whitewash their home.
It's humiliating, it's hurtful. It's one of those things that I don't wish on anybody, right? Because it makes you feel less than.
The problem so pervasive, it was parodied on a recent episode of Inside Amy Schumer.
That's the real estate agent. Take this. Just do it, Reggie. Spray your face, spray your neck, spray your arms. In that order? Just do it, Reggie. Thank you for coming. Thank you for coming.
Compounding the issue, a severe lack of diversity in the home appraisal industry. The profession more than 97% white and male-dominated. As a young Latina woman, Dominique Curtis is a rarity in the field.
You're starting to see more women appraisers, but it's still not a lot of us.
The Austins,
I'm in the appraisal industry, but I don't feel like I fit.
The Austins even taking their story to Capitol Hill. Last March, they were on hand as the Biden administration's Property Appraisal Valuation Equity Task Force, or PAVE, rolled out recommendations to address appraisal discrimination.
I'm grateful to Vice President Harris for standing with me and with other victims of appraisal bias and committing to taking on this issue.
HUD Secretary Fudge not only led the task force trying to resolve housing bias, but says she's affected by it personally.
I live literally 2 doors from a community that is all white or primarily white. 2 doors. My house is bigger than the house 2 doors from me. My lot is bigger than the house 2 doors from me. My home is valued at $25,000 less than the home 2 doors from me. It is obvious. Why?
The Austins are suing their original appraiser, claiming racism led to her lowballing the value of their home. ABC News reached out to the appraiser for comment, but we haven't heard back. In the meantime, the Austins say they plan to stay put.
We feel like this is like our forever home.
We love the folks that surround us, and we just want to continue to be here and just be.
I think there's a lot more work to be done to make sure that all Americans, no matter what they look like, who they are, the color of their skin, can truly live out the American dream. But when you aren't having your home valued for what it should be, you're essentially being cheated out of the American dream.
Our America Lowballed is streaming on Hulu.
Our thanks to Janae.
Our America Lowballed is streaming on Hulu and online at lowballed.abc.
Hi everyone, George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel, and don't forget to...
Okay, community, any thoughts? I see a lot of this. Robbie, I see a lot of this shaking heads. The community already know this is happening, but to hear another testimony, it takes it to another level. Any thoughts, community? Rita. Robbie, the question is, it's happening here in Colorado. What do we do about it? Okay, go ahead. We can hear you. Just a moment. Okay, we can hear you now.
Okay. I'm sorry, the question broke up. What was the question?
The question is, the lowball appraisals in colors of people, communities of color is happening here in Colorado. The question is, what do we do about it?
That's a great question. There's several things you can do about it. One, you can talk to the lender on a concept or a process called reconsideration of value, which is ROV. You know, it's not required by law, but every lender has different policies about that. So you can talk to them about if the appraisal comes back lower, you believe it's lower, or you feel it's lower, you can ask the lender what's the reconsideration of value process, and they can tell you what the process is. And then you can submit additional documentation or any documentation that you think justify, reconsideration of value. And then those documentation has to be presented to the appraiser to reevaluate the regional appraisal or consider the additional information. And if the appraiser deems it credible, obviously they can make some changes. If you're not satisfied with that, you can file a complaint with the state board. That's another process. So one process is reconsideration of value. The second process is you can file a complaint with the state board, and every state is different. So you have to look in Colorado appraisal board and see what the process they have. Sometimes it just requires you to complete a simple form, make phone calls, or whatever the process is, you can file a complaint. And I strongly urge you to do that. And then another process is you can file a complaint with HUD, or with PAVE, the PAVE task force. And there's also a hotline, which is number 4 item, with the appraisal subcommittee that you can call, 800 number, and launch a complaint. So the different mechanism, the different processes that you can use to file a complaint, and also there are also processes, or a process that you can use to have additional information considered if you feel your property has been lowballed.
Thank you, Robbie. Rita, to answer, and also to add, Robbie and I are putting together a list of what can you do once that appraisal comes in low. And we're going to put it on a website where you guys, so you can access what you can do.
That's for me, I'm not hearing very well.
Pardon me? Say that again?
If that's for me, I'm not hearing you very well.
Oh, what I said, that you and I are working on how a homeowner can rebuttal that appraisal report. We're working on that right now, and based off Colorado. And so we're working on that. We have another question coming in, Robbie.
Okay, stay right there. I can hear you better right there.
Okay.
Okay, I mean, you can go get your question and tell me what it is.
Okay.
It's not really so much a question, but more of a comment. And, it kind of goes back to your point, Tyrone, and I forgot your last name, but Mr. Adams. He has stated that, with the sale of your mom or your grandmother's home, they only got the value of $150,000. And it goes back to the same conversation I was having earlier about reparations. The problem is people don't understand the time value of money, right? And what money does. And so we've been in a situation where we've been taken advantage of over and over again, and for so many years and for so many decades, we've lost the value of that money and what that money means, right? Just in regards to your family, that's, I think you said it was $400,000 that you probably could have sold that home for, if I'm correct on that, right? Your family only got $150,000. Every dollar, what I teach my clients when I'm doing financial planning, every dollar is needed. The more dollars you have, the more dollars you have working for you to be able to capture more dollars. And so for us to say, one, it's going to take work, and I'm not saying that the work that you guys are doing is ill will, but what I'm saying is the problem is our people still have to take the time to do the research, to put their evidence together, which takes time from your job. It takes time from your lifestyle in regards to dealing with your family and being able to do the things that you want to do. And so what I'm trying to say, and I've been trying to stress to us, is that's the reason why we need reparations. His family lost $400,000. We don't know what the value of that money, if you would have put it in an investment account or you would have got another property, and being able to see that money turn over year after year in regards to compound interest. And so, you know, it's great that you guys are working on this, but we also need to collectively come together and say, hey, the buck stops here. We need to do more than just constantly putting extra work on our shoulders, and we need to fight for the reparation piece because we've lost that money. And so that's why I keep saying the same thing I'm saying over again. So I'm not trying to steal, you know, the thunder from you guys, but collectively, with you guys putting your minds together, I think also what you guys need to look at is, you know, maybe bringing an attorney in. How can we go after those people that have already sold their home, didn't get the value that they deserve, and really start building a legal case so that way our people can get the money? And I think respectively, we need to go through the East Side and Park Hill, Montbello, and see all those families that were taken advantage of and lost out on wealth.
And Rashad, I wanted to acknowledge as well that, oh, sorry. I didn't mean to talk over you, Walter.
Go ahead.
I just wanted to acknowledge for Rashad and others who are wanting to have this conversation around reparations today, that Kevin Patterson from Redress Movement Denver is here today, and we're going to get to talking about that a little later in the afternoon as well.
Okay, we got another question. Janice Taylor. Janice, introduce yourself. You're a realtor.
Janice Taylor, I'm a realtor. With, I have more of a comment for people who are needing appraisals now. What I advise clients is there's a checklist of what you can do to provide information to the appraiser when they get there. That's what's commonly being done now, and that's what people need to know. And in environments like this, at a future time, we can provide you what that checklist looks like, because you can let the appraiser know you are an informed homeowner. You know, I know what my house is worth. This is what I've done to it or whatever. So that's something that people need to know that they can be doing now, you know, if you have to go through an appraisal situation.
Thank you, Janice. Tyrone.
So mine is a question for Mr. Wilson, and that is, you know, you look at appraisers, they're independent contractors. And when you do some independent contract work in your house, like say you put a deck on it or do some remodeling, you always have to have the city come out and verify that the work is done correctly. Have they ever considered doing something like that for appraisers to make sure that the appraisal amount is verified?
Ooh, that's Robbie, did you hear the question?
No, I'm sorry, I did not.
Tyrone, can you come up here a little closer? Yeah, all right. Here's the question.
So, Mr. Wilson, my question is, you know, appraisers are independent contractors. And when you have independent contractors do work on your house and things like that for remodeling, you have the city officials come out to verify their work. Has the Appraisal Institute, or that ever been considered to do that for appraisers, to have someone verify their work as a checks and balance?
Yeah, okay. The appraisers are independent contractors, that's true, but not all appraisers are independent contractors. Some appraisers are staff appraisers, you know, so, and there's a review process. All appraisers get reviewed. Every single appraiser get reviewed, if that's what you're asking. You mean you say check their work. Every single appraiser get reviewed. They go through they get reviewed at least. The studies done, they get reviewed at least 6 times. They get reviewed by the underwriter, get reviewed by the loan company, and they get reviewed by the purchaser of the loan, whether it's GSEs, Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and they get reviewed by the investor. So they get reviewed a lot. But that doesn't mean, then the quality, you can argue about the quality of the review, but they do get reviewed at least 3 times.
Did you? So what he's basically, it has to go through a review at least 3 times. It goes through the underwriters, but we're still having low appraisals. Yeah, and so. We do the CMAs. how they're basing those appraisals, because as listing brokers, we're providing them comparative market analysis prices. So how they're basing the review.
There's a question from behind the basing the review. They review everything. They review the data used. The review, if they do review, they have to follow the appraisal process. They have to look at the scope of work that was performed, if it was sufficient, if it was adequate. They have to look at the data, quality of data collected. They have to look at the quality of adjustment, how it's supported, how it's not supported. If it's not supported, then the reviewer has to call that out. And then the comments are also reviewed. Are they subjective comments or objective comments? If those are subjective comments, they need to be challenged, provide objective comments. So the whole appraisal, the whole quality of the report is reviewed based on the appraisal process. See, for example, appraisers have to follow a process. You know, appraisers have to be, when you're licensed, just like realtors have to follow certain rules when they list a property. Appraisers have to follow a process. If you don't follow that process, then the appraisal itself is defective, and that can be a basis for complaint. You know, that if you're licensed, you're held to certain obligation and certain standard. Appraisers have to be held to a standard and certain ethics and standard. So when you write a report, if those processes are not followed properly, and you get reviewed, and it can be discerned, or during that review process is discovered that the appraisal process was not followed, that's a basis for appraisers lose their license all the time. They get suspended, they get fined, you know, they get their license revoked, just like realtors, or a real estate agent, or broker, or any licensed person for that matter. So that's why I said earlier on, if you feel, you don't even have to be able to justify it. If you feel that the appraiser hasn't done a good job, file a complaint and let the state look at it. If there's merit to the complaint, then they investigate it. If there's no merit, obviously the complaint will be dismissed.
Obviously, we need a whole standalone community meeting on appraisals. I feel like it's a problem, and it's still going to remain.
Can you get closer to the microphone so I can hear what you're saying?
I said, obviously, we need to have a community meeting just dealing with discussing about these appraisals, what is happening, what is in the works to help alleviate these problems. And Mr. Wilson wants to start a Black Appraiser Association here in Colorado. And I think that would help. And so I'm in talks with some Black appraisers here in Colorado. If you've got the Denver Black Pages, you got Robin Anderson, Justine Taylor. So if you know of any Black appraisers, we need to have our own association group. Do you agree, Robbie?
Yeah, we need to have a chapter there of NASRA. That's what you're saying. Yes, I agree with that completely. And also, again, this is not a new problem. Okay, I know we're talking about it now. It's hot right now since 2020 or 2018, depending on the data you look at. But this has been going on since the 1920s. It's not new. And this is not a problem that's going to be solved overnight. You know, obviously, if you have an appraisal, you're doing a home, then you need immediate action. That reconsideration of value, provided. But to Walter's point, which I agree with, we need to recruit, like we discussed and started off when you asked me on the phone, we have less than 2% appraisers professional in the industry. So we need to make sure, and our census population is about 13%, 13% plus. So there's a deficit right there by 11%, deficit of Black appraisers needed in the profession. So that's one solution that NASRA is providing, or hoping to provide, is to recruit, you know, African American Black appraisers into the profession. Over time, it pays very well, it builds well, it's a good profession, you know. So it's no different from that of a doctor, a lawyer, a nurse, an engineer. We need more, I believe that we need more appraisers in the industry, you know, given the fact that we're already short as it is, meaning at least 9% short. That's about, if you take, hypothetically, there's about maybe depending on the data you look at, there's 75,000 appraisers in the country, or 80,000. So if you take 75,000, 10% of that is what? 7,500. So we're short at least 7,000 appraisers. We need at least 7,000 appraisers right now to be black appraisers. We need at least 7,000 blacks to be appraisers right now.
We need.
That's a tall order.
Yeah, we need at least 7,000 black appraisers right now. The question, how do you become an appraiser? And Terry, I can send you all the requirements, and I think I'll send it to Danielle, I'll send it to Rita. Yeah, Rita? Yeah, you can't pick an appraiser. That was some of the problem. Huh?
Get closer to the microphone so I can hear you.
We can't pick the appraiser. That was one of the problems that got us in trouble in 2008. Realtors was able to call their buddy, say we need this price, and you know what happened there. Tim, you've been waiting.
Appraisers, we also need more black folks and other people of color inside lending institutions, because that's where those appraisals end up, are with the lending institutions. So we need also folks of color there that can say, well, we know these areas, because these appraisals come in, the lender's saying, well, this is what the appraisal says. So we need also the individual borrowers to be proactive and say there's something wrong with the appraisal. Because we did take the appraisal process out of the institution and made it independent for obvious reasons, which Walter just mentioned. So there's another part of this equation that we also need to be looking at in terms of the lenders.
So obviously this is a big onion that has lots of layers. And so, Robbie, we want to say thank you so much. I know we got started late, but I will be following up with you. Our community definitely has questions. They want guidance on how we can prepare ourselves against these lowball appraisers. I want to be able to get out to them what it takes to become an appraiser, and what are those requirements. So, amen. Thank you again.
Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate it. I wish we had a better technical connection, but I appreciate the opportunity, and I thank you all for doing the great things that you're doing.
Okay. Thanks, Robbie.
Thank you, sir.
Question, sir.
How about now?
There you go.
So I got a lowball appraisal, and when I looked at the appraisal, one of the things that they have to do is they have to justify the appraisal by comparables, right? And so when I'm reviewing the appraisal went outside of my neighborhood in order to identify comps. So I was able to look at homes inside my neighborhood and demonstrate the difference of the value. And so that's one of the things that we can do as individuals. This other stuff, the institutional stuff, takes time, but we can get appraisals, right? We can get information on our neighborhood, and we can compare it, because again, they have to justify their appraisal, and they do that with comps. So I know everyone's different, but that's one way of being able to take, some just personal attention to address that.
And part of this is education. I can teach you how to read an appraisal and what their little comments are, or what their little comments in the appraisal. And so it has an ugly head. And when you're thinking about just my opinion, a lot of the appraisals by white men were conservative. They were conservatives. And they came in to appraise your home, and you got pictures of Jesse Owens or Muhammad Ali. Well, you know. Okay, well, we're going to wrap up. I want to say, Kevin, will you haven't made any comments. Will you make some comments here?
Well, Walter, I have to say this has been a great gathering of folks, and if I had to use one word, it's education. You have to come to forums like this to hear a wide range of issues that face the African American community. It reminds me of something someone told me some time ago about politics and papers and policies. Now, this is Fair Housing Month, April. And you remember just 2 years ago that the Trump administration tried to just gut fair housing. They had a Secretary of Housing who, well, I'm not running for anything, so I guess I can call him anything I want. But and then it took the Biden administration to come back and say, no, we aren't going to do away with fair housing. But people hear those things, and they think it's okay or to slide for 2 or 3 or 4 months. Now, the Fair Housing Act has been around since 1968 and hasn't been the greatest enforced amendment or law in the land. It goes in and out, and you can see that in Colorado probably as recently as, let's say, Tuesday night, but I'm not going to get into that. But the fact is, you got to educate yourself. You got to know who are the leaders in the institutions, the appraisal world, the mortgage world. You got to follow it, because if you don't, we're going to lose out. I think the thing that we heard from everyone today is, if you got a piece of property, if it's an inch, keep it. Do not sell anything. You just can't, because people will, I don't have to go through all the stories. They will say anything. Here's $1, and they should have given you $50. Keep your property. When you do your wills, when you do your conversations with your family around the dinner table, say, when I pass, or grandmama pass, or auntie pass, keep it in the family. Don't squabble about splitting it up. I know what I'm talking about. Keep it in trust. You got to. And again, Walter, you have again put together a great group. And I mean, I thought the next one, maybe that's going to be Black veterans, which Walter has done that. It gave Noah and Noah Prime, the newsletter. We did 3 series on Black veterans and what they should have gotten, and their families should have gotten. So there's no giving up. Nothing has changed that much. Anyway, thank you, Walter. Okay.
Thank you, Kevin.
And thank you for a wonderful lunch. You have lunch like this all the time. You have people come up here every Saturday.
All right. Okay. Just real quick, Addison, real quick. I want to acknowledge Danielle, Rita, and Terry, because they were part of our expert panelists. We're totally off script, but that's okay. Danielle.
Thank you. I'm so grateful to be here with you all today, and on the eve of Easter. I think this is appropriate. When we think about our history as Black Americans in this country and how post-slavery, once slavery ended, and we were just kind of released like we were wild animals with no tools, unless our former enslavers were nice enough to leave us some land or grant us some land ownership. So just thinking about where we started and where we are today, and I know it's hard because politics is complex and there's a lot that we have to work on. I'm also the Vice President of Colorado Black Women for Political Action, so I would be remiss if I did not mention, thank you, if I didn't mention some of the bills that are happening right now as it relates to housing at the Capitol, and this is why it's so important to vote for the people who represent you at the state and local level. These are the people who have more influence on your everyday life than anyone else. I understand we love to vote on the presidential elections, but these midterms, these off-year elections, our numbers are really low in the Black and Latino community. So please, folks, vote, vote, vote. You know, we saw the results of the Denver mayoral and municipal elections. You guys, if you were unhappy with that and you were reminding people to vote, your neighbors, your friends, your aunts, your uncles, your cousins, this is important. We have to vote. We have to be very vocal about the importance of civic engagement in our community. So let me just pull up these bills real quick so you guys know what's happening down at the Capitol. And I'm often there, so if you see me, please don't hesitate to say hello. But one of those is, so first one, House Bill 23-1095, prohibited provisions in rental agreements. HB 23-1115, repeal prohibition local residential rent control. HB 23-1171, just cause requirement eviction of residential tenant. HB 23-1254, habitability, of residential premises. And HB 23-1190, that's the affordable, the affordable housing right of first refusal. So these are all, they've been introduced into the Senate. They may be on the governor's desk for signing at this point in time, but be cognizant of please be knowledgeable and aware of what bills are being proposed. There's a policy director who works for our current Speaker of the House, Rebecca McCluskey. Know these names, know these people. You can request meetings with them. You can talk about your issues. We have to be vocal. We have to be loud. We have to complain. We have to make calls down to our legislators and let them know what it is that we want. And we have to have a consensus in our community on what those things are. If you're in front of the governor, if you're in front of any of the people, your elected officials, be sure that you have some notes in which you can present to them and say, hey, this is what I am interested in seeing as far as it relates to my community. This is what we need. Know what you want, express it, let folks know, be vocal. One last thing, and I'll pass the mic over to Rita, who is a legal expert and knows her stuff and just ran for office. And thank you for running. That's very important. That's right. Let's see. Let me just get back to some statistics here that I wanted to make sure to share with you all. I know we're limited on time, but I was just looking at some of these statistics on my way here, and I'm just shocked at how we've been here as almost the longest, with the exception of the indigenous people. We've been here, or some of our people are indigenous as well, quiet as kept. But the U.S. home ownership rate, it increased to 65.5% in 2021. The rate among Black Americans lags significantly at 44% and has only increased by barely less than half a percent in the last 10 years, and is nearly 29 percentage points less than white Americans at 72.7%. We look, we know what's happened to us, and we can talk about the problem all day, but we have to come to the table with some solutions. So rely on your experts. Talk to the folks over at NAREB. Talk to all of these different community leaders who do the work. I'm not an expert on housing, but as a woman, a Black woman who watched my father's home get foreclosed on in 2008 after being unemployed, my mother struggling with home ownership. I myself, as a millennial, have never owned a home, and I do well financially, but there's always a barrier. So just thinking about what it looks like to be just a renter in this society and not be able to create and build that wealth and pass it on. Now, I'm on the verge of home ownership. I've just met with a few lenders, and we're working through all of that. We're new to Aurora and are working on becoming wealth builders in our family. But it is an arduous and difficult process. There are resources available for you. I did ask my lender, are there any exceptions or opportunities for African Americans who are first-time home buyers? And he did say that if you have lived in Denver, because when Aurora doesn't apply to us, but if you lived in Denver since 2001 or before that, you qualify for a special, yes, you guys were just hearing about that, Deerfield. So be aware and ask questions, because you never know what you're missing out on, and they don't necessarily give that information to you. You have to ask questions. So that is my soapbox, and I thank you so much for listening to me. Please, if you are a black woman or an ally of black women, join Colorado Black Women for Political Action. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Danielle. I'm Rita Lewis. I'm going to be short and brief. So I think one of the solutions to our housing problems is we need to create black credit unions. We used to have black credit unions in Denver. They've disappeared. We used to have Zion Credit Union. And that way, we are the makers of our own reality. And I think we need to go back to that. And as everybody else has said, my mom said, if you sell any of my property, I'm gonna come back and haunt you. So I know I'm not selling any of her property, and I advise everybody else to do the same thing. Just, if you all don't know, Kevin Marchman knows, with Northeast Park Hill Coalition, we are going to have a 250 unit building built right on 38th and Holly. And most of us don't know about that. And what do we need to do? We need to purchase some of that. You know, let's not just look at it and walk past it. We need to buy. We've lost Holly, well, a portion of Holly. You know, Miss Lady still owns that same side, and she's not selling, thank God. We've lost Dahlia, we've lost Fairfax, we lost Oneida. The list goes on. We gotta buy our community back, and we're not doing it. We need to do like the other communities. We need to put our money into a pot and go from there. Thank you, Rita Lewis. Oh, and happy Fair Housing Month.
Terry, bring us home on this segment. You can come, and we want to get you on camera. Come where? Right there. Bring us home.
My name is Terry Jackson, and I'm a proud Park Hill. I grew up in Park Hill. I can't afford to live there anymore. But we've just started the African American Trade Association, and we are working with Walter, with NARAB, to really start our own black home ownership program. We've been doing some work with CHAFA, and with the help of Walter, a bunch of other organizations, we are going to roll out a program where we're going to try to increase black home ownership by 2030. So we're trying to give it a name. It'll probably be something like 50 by 30. Our current home ownership, like Danielle was saying, is 37%. So we're going to try to get it up to 50%, but it's going to require all of the things that we've been talking about. Appraisals, getting us our credit together, educating our young people about what we're doing. The thing that's disappointing for me today is we don't have our young people here. And I don't know how we need to figure out a way together to get them involved so that they're here for us today. So just to bring us home, I think this is an incredibly important initiative for our community. We're going to be rolling out this program. You're going to start to see advertisements. You're going to start to see us really get out there and start dealing with really addressing the young people and getting them credit aware, having programs in Denver Public Schools, talking about home ownership. So thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, Terry. Okay. Well, Addison is up, and I just want to make one closing in terms of what I'm thinking. We're talking about this generational wealth, the gap. Everybody remembers the story about the Manhattan Beach, where the city just stole it. Could you imagine the wealth that was lost out? Businesses, communities. But again, we're solution oriented. Tyrone, Tim, Kevin, all of us, we are part of the solution. So let's don't lose sight of that. So we're going to have our last presentation, and I think you'll find this pretty interesting. It's called the Mapping Project. Thank you for being here, brother. Okay. Kevin, you want to go ahead and just introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Kevin Patterson. I work for an organization called the Redress Movement. And so as many folks have kind of, alluded to, right, like we're working on redress. And we would distinguish that slightly differently from reparations. That's a smaller piece of what we want to see for reparations, right? So we've invoked the name of like Martin Luther King, folks who came before us and like putting together the civil rights movement. And we think we need a lot of that momentum again today, right? As folks have also talked about, or we've been seeing throughout the day, right? Like a lot of these things are connected to what's happened in the past. And so one of the things that we've been doing actually is we came to the Denver Public Library and we were documenting specifically like what has happened here in Park Hill, in 5 Points, right? What did that violence look like? Who were some common actors there? And we want to make sure that we're like asking for the same type of like public funding and infrastructure from the government, who is also colluding with bad actors as well, to displace us from our homes, right? To undercut our loans, right? We didn't receive the same type of opportunities, right? You mentioned like veterans and the GI Bill. Like we'd ultimately like to see those types of things come back into vogue for black folks who didn't benefit from GI Bill or fair housing that was passed, or FHA loans that were passed a while ago that has allowed this wealth gap to really start. So we're trying to figure out like, how are we gonna, we're working on like both the research in local areas. So right now we're in Charlotte, North Carolina, Milwaukee, and here in Denver. So I'm the on-the-ground organizer for that. And we've done a large amount of research looking at like how our communities were displaced, who was a part of that, who was colluding, right? Like the cronies from the Mayor Sphere era, the urban renewal planning, the highway going through Elyria, Swansea, right? And why is it that our communities don't have the same type of public investment when it comes to schools, when it comes to health choices, grocery stores, right? We know that's very much intentional. We want to put together the dots to figure out like, we want to see those resources back, right? Not just in the form of, but not excluding, the monetary benefits that folks have been talking about all day, but also like the infrastructure that's been denied us as well, right? One way that we also talk about like segregation, we're looking primarily at housing, right? Where we're able to live, where we're not able to live, where we've been historically excluded, and like what are inclusionary housing zones, right? We're also looking at like schools, right? Some of the reasons that people choose the neighborhoods that they're at is because of like the public education that you can actually access. What do those curriculums look like? Or what are they teaching and not teaching? Like there's very clear places as where you want to put your kids into schools because of that. And that's also a historical and current, looking at DPS, one of the most segregated public school systems in the nation, happening right now, right? So we want to connect the historical sort of legacy of what's been happening with racial discrimination and segregation and pull that into contemporary. One of the things that we've also been fighting on the ground right now is for the HOA foreclosure situation, right? There was some legislation that was passed last year that's helped curtail some of that, but even last week, or 2 weekends ago, a family was foreclosed on their house for HOA fines. And these are for things like oil stains, weeds, blinds that get compounded by attorney's fees, and folks are losing their equity that we've just been talking about, like we don't want to sell for pennies on the dollar, right? Super undercut. Folks not understanding or even knowing where the auction's happening sometimes, and someone coming to their door, knocking on their house door and saying, I'm the new owner of your property because of HOA fines. So that's still currently going on. Like I said, there's been some legislation that's curtailing that, but we don't think it goes far enough, and we're trying to build some practices. And we also want to tie like these, like we've been talking with the redlining, the deeds, also like how some of these like covenants got written and turned into property owners associations or taxpayer associations, and that got brought into the covenants and bylaws of the current HOAs that are predominantly over folks of color as well, and that can dictate whether or not you get to keep your house, despite the fact that you might be paying your mortgage, right? So these are things we want to bring as like historical issues that are contemporary issues now too, and definitely want to see how that's working. And that's just a smaller piece of like what we're ultimately trying to build to as like a larger like redress of some of these issues that I think folks have been getting at. And so we just wanted to expand that discussion on the larger end of like of that. Yeah.
Again, I just want to reiterate, Your legislators' phone numbers are public information. You can just Google their name, or you can find your registration, find out what your House district number is, what your Senate district number is. These are the types of issues that you need to be calling them and burning up their phone lines about. We need to change this. We want to change. They get 5 bills each session. Session's about to close in May. Now is the time to be presenting your concerns with them and letting them know, we want you to carry this bill for us. We want you to do this work, and then you can work with them and the drafters at the Capitol, and they will create legislation that would then go to committee, and then there's a whole process for getting a bill into a law. But please, please be vocal, because what's happening to our seniors, to our vulnerable people who aren't aware of their rights, is just ridiculous. It's inhumane. I've seen some of these news reports, like this poor woman, I mean, she must have been like 92 or something like that, and was getting her home taken over an HOA violation. It was just ridiculous. So please, please be vocal. Email them, call them, make your feelings heard, and of course encourage community to vote.
Thank you, Danielle.
Yeah. I'll just transfer it back to Asim, and we'll kind of talk more about like reparations and like the scope of like how that also ties into housing too. So.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kevin. Kevin has been working on this much longer than I have, and I had the opportunity to connect with him through my job at the Denver Public Library. So the Denver Public Library received an $8,000 grant from the State Internet Portal Authority that is designed to increase the amount of public data that's available online. And this project was specifically to document the history of explicit racial exclusions in Denver real estate. So this $8,000 is just intended to be a small pilot project to demonstrate what's possible. So we received data from the county clerk and recorder's office, a total of 144,000 records. Since this past year, I've personally reviewed 33,000 public records that include all kinds of things like deeds, liens, foreclosure documents, wills and estates, military enlistment records. We combed through all of that to see where we could find explicit racial exclusions. And so I'd like to share with you the findings from that today, and then talk with you and with Kevin about what this work might look like or mean going forward. And I apologize if I have to stand funny. I can't stand on my foot anymore. So as I already mentioned, we received 144,000 records for a 5-year time span from 1931 to 1935. To date, I reviewed 33,000 records. That was just for 1931. I've also trained an additional 20 staff members at the library to conduct these public records reviews, and they've completed a few. That's more indicative of their interest in the project, because while we have these 20 people that are very interested, it's really no one's primary job responsibility at this point in time. And so we're looking at ways to crowdsource these public reviews. It's worth noting that the only thing that's preventing us from doing that at this time is the data agreement with the clerk and recorder's office. All of these records that we have received are public record. And I can share with you in a Word document and a spreadsheet everything that these documents say, but I can't show you the PDF files themselves. We can talk more about that later. It's a little bit silly, and it's giving us a hang-up in the volume of the records that we can review. But we do hope to form a partnership with NAACP specifically that will enable us to train members to help us to get through these crowdsourcing reviews much more quickly. So in this work, I was able to identify 100 explicit racial restrictions. And those explicit restrictions spanned 35 different subdivisions. 50% of all of those race-related restrictions can be traced back to one real estate company. It's called the DC Burns Realty and Trust Company. You might be familiar now at DU is the Burns School of Construction and Real Estate Management. It's named after Frank Burns. Daniel Burns is the one that signed off on all these restrictions in 1931. His nephew Frank Burns then became president in 1938. And now we have this real estate school named after them, a family that built presumably affordable housing legacy that wrote an explicit Negro restriction into their standard contract. And that was really important because when we started training people to do this, my supervisor and I agreed that we could probably, because of the volume that we had to review, we thought we could skip most of the pre-typed text. That people were, if there was going to be a racial restriction, that people were going to handwrite it or typewrite it into the open boxes. We thought it would just be too brazen for them to print forms that said this en masse. For the most part, they didn't actually, but there are a couple of companies, DC Burns being one of them, they wrote this racial restriction into every transaction that they wrote. And that's important because some people will say, well, you found 100 restrictions and you reviewed 33,000. Isn't that kind of a small amount? I think that's a silly question, so I don't really want to entertain it. But the reason I'm bringing it up again here is that once I started to recognize this pattern, I started tracking every transaction for DC Burns Real Estate, whether it had an explicit racial restriction or not. The reason for that is because when you have a release of deed, for example, so the property's been paid off, there's no place in a release of deed for a racial restriction to be written. There's just nowhere on the form that it's going to go. But we know that if this is a release of deed from in 1931 from a property sold in 1924, we have every reasonable reason to think that the original deed had the racial restriction. So these 100 records are indicative of a much larger problem, and the purpose of this project is really to call out those systemic patterns and the way they continue to impact people today. Another thing that we found is there's a lot of connected criteria. So in the same section of a deed, the encumbrances or restrictions, or it might say something like property may only be sold to members of the Caucasian race, or white householders only, or shall not be sold to a Negro. There are other types of restrictions at the same time. So things like liquor restrictions, each transaction must be on no fewer than 2 lots. Minimum lot value must be, it ranged from $3,500 up to, I actually found one for $50,000 in 1931, so that was a really big deal. The type of building materials, other types of land uses, et cetera. So those are things that we're used to seeing now in the construction of our neighborhoods, but they really grew at the same time as racial restrictions, and they're very deeply interconnected. Hi. I heard Lakewood. I didn't hear the last part.
Have you looked at some of the restrictions in Jefferson County, Lakewood, as well as I'm sure you know about the restrictions that were at Clayton College over there off of Martin Luther King and Carlisle Boulevard?
Yeah, I'm familiar with those stories for sure. One of the people often ask, how can I help? Because I want to look at this in my neighborhood. And I wish that we could set it up to do that, because it would really be a draw for people. One of our challenges is that I literally received 144,000 individual PDFs with nothing but an identifying number. And so I can't pull things out from a neighborhood or a person. I have to literally just read each one. But as we know about those connections, we're pulling out related transactions as we find them.
So I'd like to connect you with a section with the Colorado Bar Association. They've been working on this for 2 years. And it's the same thing, the restrictive covenants that you're covering. So it would be good for you to connect with them.
Thank you. I would really appreciate that very much. So the scope of the grant initially was limited. Like I said, it was only $8,000 to start. That came from the state. The library believes it's a very important project. Let me see how we are on time. I want to give you the background of some of the challenges that we've had with this. The biggest challenge is that we thought we were going to be able to search these records the same way you search a Word document for a name. John Smith, Control F, find. We couldn't do that with these records. They haven't gone through what's called an OCR, or an optical character recognition process. So we can't just computerized search them. We have to put our own eyes on them. That required building a whole back-end infrastructure to do this. And what we thought we were going to be able to review 5 years of data with that $8,000. In reality, that $8,000 only got us through 1 year piloting the process and trying to get a crowd review training underway. So that's how we spent the first $8,000. Then the library said, well, this is too important, we're going to continue. They've put another $16,000 in to continue reviewing these remaining 4 years. I can talk more about that later, but for the sake of time, I better keep going. So the blue that you can see on this map is all of the subdivisions that were in existence in 1931, and the red are all of the subdivisions that we identified as having a racial restriction. The actual number is probably much larger. This doesn't say anything about before 1931 or anything about after 1931. So it's a really small snapshot of what was actually happening. Then we've been very careful to create a high quality data process, because when we start to talk about redress and reparations, at the end of the day, we want to be able to make that argument with the clearest data possible. And so every racial restriction that we put on a map, I'm sorry, again, you're not going to be able to see it well here, but we are connecting the document number, the clerk and recorder, the grantor and grantee, the buyer and seller, the lot description, that's the legal description, the exact racial text that was contained, the names of the institutions, and the name of every corporate and government officer listed on that document. One thing that I didn't do with 1931, but I have started now for the years going forward, is at the beginning I was not collecting the principal sum, the interest, and the other financial details. In retrospect, that was really silly, so I want to apologize for that now, but I am collecting all of that information going forward, because in talking to Kevin, many other folks, an idea that we are floating and trying to be strategic around is, let's put a valuation to the documents that we have in front of us. Let's see what that means for an inflation-adjusted dollar. Let's keep in mind that these 100 transactions are clearly representative of 1,000 transactions or more, and really start to call for dollar redress and reparations in using this data. There's many other ways that we can do that as well, but this is a piece of the pie that we have now in black and white. Then the actual goal for the library was not just to make the spreadsheet of the data, but it was to create a story map. So I have completed a story map based on the data that we have for 1931. Just this week, the library gave me about 2.5 pages of edits that they want before they'll publicize it, and most of it is actually shortening it. They said it's too long, it's a little beyond our scope, save that and we'll do it in blog posts or whatever. But because they didn't tell me that in time, I'm going to share with you the version that I wrote and that I'm proud of. So let's see here. So we just start with a little bit of the Denver planning context. These are old maps in the archives from the 1920s, the 1930s. 1925 is the first year that Denver has its first zoning code. Benjamin Stapleton is the mayor, leader of the KKK. At the same time, Denver is planning its vision for what kind of city it's going to be. We have a proposed parks and boulevard map. We have a transit and transportation map. But as you comb through the plans for the city, it's clear that it wasn't always a vision that was intended for everyone. So we want people to be aware of that context. It goes beyond housing. I think here in this room, we all know that, but we want to make sure that that's a part of the story that everyone else knows as well. I will have to skip through some of this for time, But we've been careful to pull images from the archives. Many of these I'm sure you're familiar with, but the NAACP in early Denver, the American Woodman Life Insurance Company. And then we have this interactive map, which is kind of the end goal of the project for the library, where everywhere you see one of these red pings, you can click on that and you can see an abbreviated version of all of the back-end information that I just showed to you. So the abbreviated version, you'll be able to see the grantor, the grantee, and the explicitly racial language. We had to go through a process on the back end of abbreviating that text. We can't include the full block because maybe too much information, but I learned that the public interface will only accept a limited number of characters. So if you're reading through any of this and you're like, man, I need the rest of that record, I'm more than happy to share it with you. I just can't host it on this platform. And then the significant findings I've already shared with you. We've of course made the clear connection to redlining in this story map to make sure that that is a story that's being told continually. And then we took a look at the places where there were subdivision-wide restrictions. So this was really important because at first it was looking like all of these racial restrictions were one-offs. You have one bad neighbor that wants to keep the block white, and that's it. Well, we know that that is not how it worked, and we have these documents to prove it. So in places like Bonnie Bray, Park Lane Square, Lakota Heights, even though I don't have a document that says neighborhood covenant that applies to all the houses, I have individual deeds that are written to apply to the entire subdivision. If that sounds confusing, it was confusing to me. Let me rephrase that. It was confusing to me at first because the city told us that covenants were not in play in Denver until the 1940s. And I kind of thought to myself, A, that either doesn't sound right, or our definition of a covenant is too narrow if we're saying that that's true. And I was able to find that my instinct on that was correct. That some of these standard forms were actually very lengthy. It's called a deed, not a covenant, but it was written in such a way that it was intended to apply to the entire neighborhood. So, so that was in Bonnie Bray, Lakota Heights. We've got some images of all those places. Park Lane Square. So we've pulled a lot of the historical maps to just accompany this story in the project. Probably the most rage-inducing finding that I found was a transaction in which School District Number 1 is the seller of the property, and School District Number 1 wrote a racial restriction into their contract. It's a hard thing to even say out loud. Then one of the things that was fun about the project, alongside all the hard and depressing stuff, was that because all the records were mixed in, I started finding a lot of records for other cool things, like arts organizations, opera houses with like long descriptions of the color of the chairs and the gold fixtures and all of that. But then we start comparing those documents to other historical documents and identifying, again, the things that we know where people were excluded from public places, hotels, theaters. So I did my best to incorporate that story into this map. I'm happy with it, but I think this is the library wants to cut, so it'll go into another story. But I'm sharing that piece with you because Denver is the capital, and these ideas spread from the capital outward to Colorado Springs, to Estes Park, and the discrimination in hotels was an interesting way of tracking that. Then I was really glad to hear Walter talking about the Negro Motorist Green Book, because this is a map that I can imagine creating in the future, where we can map these different locations and be able to tell those stories in the same type of sort of online platform. Yeah, and then the NAACP has already been involved in this project. At the beginning, there was really some question about if and how we were going to get the data at all. The long story short there is that there was some cold feet at the city level, and agreement had to be worked out between the clerk and recorder all the way up to the city attorney's level to determine what portion of these public records would be public. And I think NAACP writing a letter, very clear, very pointed letter, was the real tipping point in getting that done. I had been waiting to start the job for literally months after I was hired to get the data. We wrote the letter from NAACP and we had it within 2 weeks. So thank you all for that. Then I'll skip back to our PowerPoint here. I'm feeling a little flustered because I want to be mindful of everyone's time. But Kevin and I wanted to, bring the conversation back to redress and reparations. I think our hope today is to talk a little bit more about redress, because we know that reparations is, of course, it's housing, it's education, it's prisons, it's reproductive health care. But we would like to get your ideas on housing redress specifically today. Take some ideas that we can continue working on and keep reporting back out to you on that progress. So, Kevin, I'll let you just maybe start with some questions.
I'll make it just a tangential point too of I think we've heard a lot of just things that are already in the movings around appraisals, around getting folks trained in education and connecting folks to resources too, that we also see as pivotal to that. Yeah, so I just kind of want to start there. Okay. Yeah, so I mean, I think we're all here kind of talking about reparations, but we want to figure out how do we see this actually coming into play, right? Is how are we making it more politically feasible? Folks have talked about a little bit about California and that moving forward there. What would that look like maybe in a Colorado context? What would need to come together? And so we were curious what folks thought in the room around how we might make that more attainable here in Colorado.
I agree with the idea 100% wholeheartedly. So Kevin will probably have to answer the second part of this. I can only answer the question as a data scientist. And when you say, how do we know what those people are, we just don't have that data. Or we don't have an organized method of collecting it for a large data analysis. So if we want to do that, we need to formalize the means of collecting that data. And that could even be through something like a community oral history project, where we get everyone together, we hand out our contact information, and we say, if your grandma, your great-great auntie, your dad has this experience, we want to talk to them so we can document that. That's one way. As a data scientist speaking to the data that I have right now, this is the only data I have is about the properties that were restricted and what the value of those was. So something that Walter and I have talked about briefly, Portia we've talked about briefly, Kevin, is saying, this is a made-up number, but let's say that the total value of all of the restricted parcels I found that are explicit, let's say it was $3 million then, and that means it's, I can't do inflation off the top of my head, maybe it's 50 or 100 million now, that we then create an affordable housing strategy that costs exactly that amount of money, and dig our heels into producing that one thing. So that's just one of many ideas, but that is an idea that we're floating around and that we would like to call everyone's expertise into that conversation.
I think too, really quickly, even with like calculators that do kind of get at some of like larger numbers that have been kind of thrown out around reparations, I think too, beyond that, like how are we making that demand to folks so that they're actually give it to us, right? And I'd be really curious about like, because I also agree. I think that's a really good step in like doing that and like building folk stories around that and like connecting with those people to bring them in is also super important. But like, I think we could make some pretty well-educated guesses on like what the resources should look like. But given that information, what's the next step to get folks kind of like to give it to us?
I have a process answer, not a black and white answer, but I like that question because, again, it's a data-driven question. And one of the things that I think we can and we should be asking for, I think I mentioned earlier that I'm a really big proponent of community planning grants because it takes time. It takes so much time to do this that saying, you know what, we have census data for Colorado that adopted the tract system in the 1940s. Very hard to track demographics before the 1940s because it wasn't a standardized tract system. But 1940s, even easier in the 50s, we can track all of that migration, movement, demographic numbers, percentages, all of that. And when we can couple that demographic data with the financial data that we're collecting now, we can paint a really clear picture. But that task it's really a mix of, it takes some, I think it's fair to say it takes some pretty specialized skill to do things like doing the mapping, doing the census demographic analysis. But to me, it's important to me that that conversation doesn't stay like, oh, this is a specialist task. I don't actually believe that. It only takes 1, 2, or 3 of us to know how to do it and to create ways to ask other people to help us to do it so that we can keep that momentum up. So I love a data-driven question. So that's one way we can get at it. But time is one of the biggest factors. You know, $8,000 of funding is 400 hours of time.
Let's do it, man.
And at the end of the day, it's not that much.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know if I have too much more to add to that, but I agree, right? I think we should be looking specifically. I agree with your notion too of like, we want the whole cold hard facts of like what the situation looks like and being able to put that into place. I mean, yeah, I think it'd be kind of baffling to get all of that and like connecting all the people for a lot of different reasons. I know even with contemporarily Green Valley Ranch, it's hard to find folks even as recently as like 2 years ago who were displaced to come up and like figure out where they are, what their house was taken for, and things like that. So I agree with that mechanism of like really putting that like really getting what that is. We have a research team too that's like really trying to figure out the specifics of what's happening in the Colorado context so that we can put like folks like the Burns on blast and ask them for like restitution on what was the harm that happened to this particular community. But yeah, I think it's like moving into like what mechanisms are going to get those large entities to also cater to our demands. Although I'll just like reverse it back to, again, opening statements from this morning around like starting from the church. And I think like communities like that, organizations that you belong to, where we're deeply connected to each other and understand one another's struggles are ways that we can continue to bring that precedent forward. And like we've all been talking about education too as a means of that. And like small education projects like this where like we're talking about like how this happened, what it looks like in Park Hill and 5 Points, and how that's impacting like even Green Valley Ranch today, and folks of color and black folks being moved from where they initially are to like also support and like putting a face to that data as well.
Thanks, Kevin. I have just 3 brief things because I really want to be mindful of everyone's time we have gone over today. Just going back to the DC Burns example, I think it's really powerful to target institutions, and a lot of people have a political worry in general that like, oh, if we're adversarial, then blah, 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 blah. So I think actually, so my opinion on that is I'm actually not afraid to be adversarial. I say bring it, and sometimes I get yanked back, and that's okay. But I think we're also in a climate right now where when you have a school of real estate and construction management at DU on the surface, and probably deeply in a lot of areas, actually wants to do the right thing. That is a great partner with endowments created to do this type of work. So I think that we can do calling out, and we should, but we're at a time where we can also thinking about it as a calling in, and that there are more people now willing to see it as such and to really put their money where their mouth is. You know, I hope that's not a naive hope. I have to hold in my heart that that is actually true and possible. And if it's not, then we fight harder and get adversarial, and we can talk about, you know, how to do that next. Then I really appreciated, Terry? I really appreciate that you mentioned needing to call in the young people, because I talked to Walter, and I want to apologize because I didn't put this forth fast enough. It's very important to me that all of our NAACP events, every one of them, summits like this especially, that we're reaching out to the Youth Council, that we give them a piece of the day to speak their mind, to ask questions, to teach us. But I'm bringing that up now because something that I would truly love is I would love to find a young person or two that wants to learn about the mapping, because it is such a specialized skill, and it's so fun, and there's so many different things that you can do with it, that if we can think of a way to support that, maybe you know, giving a youth a stipend to work on this for a quarter or something like that, I would love to work with a young person to do that. And then the last thing I will say is on first Tuesdays of every month from 5:30 to 7 Walter, in the evening, Walter and I will be hosting a housing meeting that's open to all NAACP members and their invited guests. You don't have to tell us who they are, just invite them. That will be on Zoom. And I'd like to return to this conversation, hopefully for our May meeting, so we can hit some new people, get some people that were here today, and make sure this is a conversation that has momentum, because it's very important that this whole mapping is not a story of the past. It is, of course, but it's really about what we're going to do right now, and making sure that the words and the reality of redress and reparations are at the front of every room that we enter. And for me as a planner, that's particularly important because it's actually part of our mandate. It's written into the American Institute of Certified Planners Code of Ethics and Professional Conduct. It is the law of our profession and is so often missing. And so I'm really committed to bringing, you know, everything that you've said today to those spaces as well.
I'll just end on a really kind of fact on it was when we talk about the history of like the fair housing in Colorado specifically, it was the NAACP that brought together all of their black organizations along with like allied groups that worked really hard on like block busting in the area and coming together in coalition. Like it wasn't benevolently given to the folks of Colorado. It was struggle that started with this organization right here that heeded that result as well. So I just wanted to like maybe stop us with that, or like give us that piece of history as well, that we are standing on the shoulders of giants. And like it happened specifically right here with this organization too, that led the charge.
Awesome. Well, Walter, is there anything that you'd like to say in closing to finish out our day?
Well, thank everybody who's still here. Thank you for your time. Certainly, this is just a beginning. There's a lot of work to be done, but I'm very, very confident that we're going to be moving the needle and coming up with solutions. So thank everybody. Addison, Kevin, thank you for stopping by. Thank you. Okay, well, we're wrapping up. That's it. Thank you. All right. The church has got that. Yeah, the church has got that. Well, yeah. Oh, please, matter of fact, I was on a couple webinars with you. Okay. Yeah. So. Okay. Collectively, we just got to get tight. We'll finish. No, but that's right. Oh my goodness. Oh, okay. Hey, boy, I would like her to follow me. I'll follow her. Yeah, I like to follow her the other way around, man. Hey. Gladys. Oh, man. That's it. Whoa. Yeah, okay. Hey, Gladys is going to go for another 50 years, huh? I know she did. Wow. So did her brother perform with her? Oh, okay. That's okay. Maybe that's always the next time. Yeah, it's always the next time. Wow. Oh, man. Oh, yeah, I don't know who those are. Oh. Pardon me? Yes, you can, ma'am. Yes, ma'am. What's your name? Michelle. Okay.